She didn't recognize the two cars parked outside the building, nor the motorcycle nearby. The building looked the same as it did 8 years ago when she last visited her father's office. The parking lot still had clamshells scattered about for car space. The gray vinyl siding on the outside had a wide red stripe stretched across the front, but it had long faded since her last visit. The glass door was tinted, making it hard to see inside. She reached for the door with her left hand, but her gaze fell on the small diamond ring on her finger. Her heart fluttered with joy. The man she loved wanted to spend his life with her. He had asked Anne-Marie to help watch Freddie for a bit. Nicole had used a breast pump to fill a couple of bottles for him, then slipped into a pretty yellow sundress with red flowers. Fred took her to Don's seafood hut for dinner. Afterward, he surprised her with a tethered hot air balloon ride over Broussard. As she looked out over Lafayette and the countryside at sunset, she was in awe of the beautiful view. "Nicole," Fred said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I know I'm not the best-looking guy, and you could have someone better." "Who says that?" she replied, turning to kiss him. "I've never had anyone as wonderful as you." "Nicole, I want you, forever," he said, slowly kneeling in front of her. "So I'm asking you, will you marry me?" Nicole looked at the ring he held, then knelt down to meet his gaze. "No, baby," she said, tears beginning to fall. "I'm begging you to marry me." "Now that sounds like a yes to me," the balloon operator chuckled as Nicole and Fred held each other tightly. Anne-Marie was buzzing with excitement when they returned home. Fred had shared his plans with her. "Well?" she asked eagerly. At first she had barely tolerated Fred when she met him. "At least I'm not dating him," she thought. But seeing his love for Nicole, for their son, and for the whole family, she understood why Nicole cared for him. She realized she not only accepted him, but loved him too. "Mama, Fred asked me to marry him," Nicole exclaimed, showing off the ring. "And Nicole asked me to marry her," Fred added proudly. Sandra looked up, surprised, when Nicole entered the lobby. Chris was upset. Months of work collecting samples in Nigeria had been compromised, and they now faced a tough financial decision. He had to return to Nigeria, avoid a very corrupt government, deal with dangerous groups, and try to get good soil samples and seismic information, or cancel the whole project. He went there himself and spent almost 3 weeks stuck in his hotel room. The corrupt government burdened him with paperwork and tried to extract bribes from him just to visit his own office and work site in Nigeria. So Norman James was blaming him personally for the success or failure of this trip. And now his daughter, who had kept her distance from him for over 2 years, was right here. Chris was likely to explode with anger. "What are you doing here?" Sandra whispered, trying to keep Chris from hearing her. Nicole was confused and hurt by Sandra's response. "I came to see my dad," she said. "Oh, Nicole, I wish you had called first," Sandra sighed. "Now is just not a good time." "What do you want?" Chris asked from the doorway of his office. "Hi, Dad." Nicole smiled and nearly skipped over to him. He had changed since the last time she had seen him. The last time he wore a wrinkled suit and had a bad wig, and his skin looked gray and dull. Now he had a bald head and a healthy tan, wore a nice suit, and stood tall, looking more alive. "Hi, what do you want?" he asked bluntly. I'm getting married," Nicole said, feeling hurt by his cold response. "Congratulations, but that doesn't explain why you're here," Chris said flatly. "At least talk to her," Sandra pleaded. "There's nothing to talk about. She cut me out of her life years ago. Just took me a while to realize it," Chris snapped at Sandra. "Dad?" Nicole asked, feeling sick. "What?" he replied sharply. "I'm getting married next month. His name is Fred Dumas, and I hope you'll walk me down the aisle," Nicole stammered, trying to hold back tears. "Get Tom Sampo to do it," he said, turning back to his desk. "I'm not close to him anymore," Nicole said from the doorway. "That's a shame," Chris said. "You made it clear that I'm not important to you either." "Dad, I'm sorry," Nicole said. "Me too, you selfish person," he shot back. "Me too." "Chris!" Sandra yelled. "What?" Chris shouted. "She needs to hear it. She hasn't seen me in over 2 years, and the only reason she's here now is because she wants something." He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a file, and tossed it on his desk. "In 1997, I had to give up a manager's job in Santa Barbara, California." "Why?" he continued. Because you had just started at St. Thomas More and were trying out for the cheerleading squad. You didn't make it, but that promotion went to Vince Guidry. Know what his bonus was the first year he was there? $1,008,000. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know Chelsea didn't want me on the team? Nicole said, trembling. 2000, I was offered the job of vice president at Pilot and asked to move to Houston, Chris continued. I had to turn it down because my daughter was training with a tennis coach, even though there are coaches in Houston, too. Ernie Braswell took it instead. I shouldn't even mention how much he made last year. He closed the file and faced her. Tell me, Nicole, how's your tennis going? He asked in a sharp tone. She started to say, but then quickly left the doorway. Chris heard her getting sick and heard Sandra comforting her softly. Daddy, I'm really sorry, Nicole said, wiping her mouth with her hand a moment later. Uh-huh, he replied. How long was I gone before you even noticed I wasn't there? I don't know, she confessed. Uh-huh, he said. I gave up my job for your tennis lessons and went to one match. I only went because I heard your mother talking to a friend about it. Do you have any idea how that feels, Nicole? To not be invited to your own daughter's tennis matches? You were everything to me and you just shut me out. Do you know how that feels? Daddy, Nicole stuttered, tears falling down her cheeks. And your 18th birthday party. My little girl is now an adult, but I was told not to come, he continued. To stay away. Daddy, Nicole began. Nicole! Sandra exclaimed, surprised that a daughter would ask her father not to be at a party. And your high school graduation, no invite, but I did love the little note you wrote on the envelope I sent you, Chris said. He could hear Sandra sighing at that. Then you have a baby. I'm a grandfather, but I hear about it from Sandra, not you, he added. And I appreciate the thank you card for the Rattle and Savings Bond. There had been no thank you card. He turned to his computer. Beautiful last words I heard from you. God, Dad, you're being really difficult. Well, guess what, Nicole? From now on, Dad's going to be difficult, he said, clicking on an icon on the screen. And now you're here because you're getting married, he said while typing. Congratulations, Nicole. You got what you wanted. Now I'm out of your life. The school bus driver and several parents of the children on the bus filed a lawsuit against the estate of Henry Hank Joseph Campion, as well as the bar. Anne Marie quickly lost any money she might have gotten from her late husband's life insurance policy due to several lawsuits. They're putting a hold on my money? She cried to the lawyer from Young Insurance. I'm sure it won't amount to anything, he said, trying to comfort her. Can I get that in writing? She shot back, hurriedly taking another pot of coffee to a customer who was waiting for her attention. Nothing comes from nothing, Harriet remarked as the lawyer left the diner. Oh, why even try? Anne Marie lamented. Because you have a daughter who needs you, and another one who thinks she's grown but needs you too, Harriet replied with a shrug. Okay, Anne Marie said, forcing a smile at a young man who walked into the diner. So, how long have you been with Pilot? She asked, noticing the logo on his shirt. About 4 months. Do you know what Pilot is? He replied, surprised. Yeah, my ex-husband is the president of the Louisiana branch, she explained, while setting the silverware on the table. Mr. Dumas? The man asked. Wow, he seems tough. I can see why you left him. Hey, Wright, the manager shouted into the dark stock room. Some girl is here to see you. Yeah? He smirked, thinking a customer was impressed by him and wanted his attention. What do you want? He grumbled, noticing Nicole. After a tough talk with her father, she was less affected by Zach's rudeness. Is there somewhere we can talk? She asked. The smoking area is out back, the manager said. Zach looked at her. She really was pretty, with long brown hair and warm eyes, but her looks hid a person who acted superior. Fred and I are getting married, she opened. That guy? Why would you want him? He laughed. He's not a loser. He's so much better than you, she shot back, her eyes sparking with anger. Sure, Zach replied sarcastically. Listen, I came to tell you that I don't want any more child support from you, Nicole said firmly. I want you to give up all rights to Freddie. And what do I get in return? Zach asked, still smirking. What do you get? Come on, Zach, Nicole exclaimed. The baby is almost 6 months old and you've never even visited him. Plus, you won't have to send me $100 a week anymore. What else do you want? Yeah, you're right, he said, tossing his cigarette into the overflowing ashtray. Okay, I got these papers online. Just sign here and here, she said, pulling out the documents from her purse. At least one thing went right today, she thought as she got back into Anne-Marie's car and drove home, the place she shared with Fred, Freddie Mama, and Sophia. Norman James was not pleased with Chris's choice to step back from Nigeria. Norman, by the time we hear back from this government person, he'll either be out of power or gone altogether, and then we'll have to start again. I just don't think it's worth it, Chris said on the phone. They say they want our business, but they really just want our money and won't do anything for it. He ignored Sandra's angry look as she brought him a cup of coffee. Fine, just send Guidry out there and see how he does, he replied sharply. I'm not going back there. Your own daughter? Sandra snapped, but Chris waved her away. Fine, if that's how you really feel, I'll send you my resignation right away, Chris said. It has been my pleasure working with you over the years, but... He hung up and picked up the coffee cup, blowing on it before taking a big sip. Really, Sandra? He yelled. Sweet and low? I can't stand sweet and low. She appeared in his office doorway, smirking at his frustration. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, her tone showing she wasn't sorry at all. I meant to put salt in it. Why didn't you just spit in it? He asked as she took the coffee cup from his hands. What makes you think I didn't? She replied before leaving the office. Anne-Marie listened intently as Nicole shared her conversation with Chris. You're kidding me, she said finally. That doesn't sound like him at all. He brought up things from 2 years ago, Nicole said, gently burping Freddie after feeding him. Do you want me to talk to him? Fred asked, feeling angry. That's sweet, but no, he was pretty mad at me. I don't want you to get involved too, Nicole said, supporting Fred. Oh, I wish I had his phone number, Anne-Marie said. I'd definitely give him a piece of my mind. He hopped on his motorcycle, started it up, and sped off. There were no tearful farewells. He hadn't told Sandra he'd sent in his resignation. Charlie Wertmuller, the vice president of the Louisiana division, was the only one he had spoken to. Charlie just shrugged, shook Chris's hand, wished him well, and then returned to his desk. Chris felt a great relief wash over him and wondered why he hadn't done this sooner. He arrived at the apartment building and parked his bike in a small shed he had built behind it, securing it next to his Indian chief motorcycle. He locked the shed behind him. Cam Powell's garden looked lovely. The peppers were large and a bright red color. The tomatoes were heavy, pulling down the vines. The summer squash looked delicious. She had told him he could take any vegetables he wanted from her garden, but he never did. She took great care of each plant, giving all her attention to them. He smiled at the scarecrow she had made, which looked just like her. It had a cone-shaped straw hat, a loose top, and pajama bottoms fluttering gently in the wind with a stick in its hand. He entered his apartment, made himself a drink with gin and vermouth, took a sip and smiled. It was a good drink to celebrate a nice day. The visit from his daughter had cast a shadow over the day. He did not like thinking about his past. It reminded him of a time when he had tried hard to please others while neglecting his own happiness. Well, didn't it make them very happy, did it? He said out loud, feeling the drink weigh on him. Had to leave and go with someone else. And how long? Nicole, how long was I gone before you even noticed? He poured the drink down the sink and thought about what to eat for dinner, but decided he wasn't very hungry. The refrigerator was almost empty, and tomorrow was grocery day. Maybe quitting his job wasn't the best choice after all. Work had been a distraction from his constant thoughts. It had given him a place to channel his frustrations and gave him a sense of purpose. He knew people described him as a tough boss. Many of his employees did not like him and talked about him when he wasn't around. Maybe they'll like Charlie Wertmuller better, he said to himself, taking off his suit and tie and lying down on his bed. Cam Powell woke up when she heard the motorcycle start. She looked out the window and saw Missa Chris, dressed in a leather jacket and blue jeans, ride away with a duffel bag on the seat behind him. "Where is your boss?" Anne-Marie shouted as she stormed into the building. Sandra forced a smile as she pointed to Charlie's door. The man was not very impressive and had been relying on Chris for years, yet he thought he could do a better job than Chris Dumas. Sandra thought he was in for a big surprise. "What do you mean?" Anne-Marie yelled but halted when she saw a nervous Charlie Wertmuller looking at her. "Very funny," Anne-Marie yelled at Sandra. Where is Chris? I don't know, Sandra replied honestly. He sent in his resignation and left yesterday. He got on his motorcycle and rode off into the sunset. Chris resigned? Anne-Marie asked, looking shocked. By the way, I really like your short hair, Sandra said. But he loves this job, Anne-Marie exclaimed. Would you like some coffee? Sandra offered as Anne-Marie sat down in the small chair in front of her desk. Thanks, Anne-Marie replied, taking the cup. How is Sophia doing? Sandra asked. I was sorry to hear she has trouble with hearing, but they are doing so much to help. And who is this? Charlie asked sharply, standing in the doorway of his office. This is Anne-Marie Sampo, Chris's former wife, Sandra said, continuing her conversation with Anne-Marie as if Charlie wasn't there, staring at them both. A diner in Monroe, Louisiana served him weak coffee and greasy eggs. He kept an eye on his motorcycle, noticing a few people looking at it. A teenage girl even touched the handlebars before going inside and speaking to the waitress, who pointed to Chris. The girl seemed disappointed when she saw a middle-aged man having breakfast. Sorry, I'm not the tough guy you expected, Chris thought to himself, rubbing his chin. Maybe a beard would help? The girl looked like she wanted to say something, but when Chris looked at her, she blushed and hurried back inside. He's right, though, Nicole said, cleaning up Sophia's lunch. What? Fred asked, glancing away from the game show he was watching. Who's right? My daddy, Nicole signed to Sophia, showing her the sign for all done. The only time I talk is when I need something, and then I don't say anything for 2 years. She looked over at Fred, who was already dressed in his work uniform, even though his shift didn't start for 2 hours. Many employees waited to change, but he wore his uniform proudly. He was a good man. Do we have any stamps? She asked. Yeah, they're in the junk drawer, he replied. Why? I want to send some pictures of Freddie to him, she said. We have so many, right? Fred helped her find an envelope and quickly grabbed the stamps after she searched for a while. Just be quiet, she joked, taking the stamps from him. Not having her father's address, she just wrote to the office in DeGard. The diner in Allister, Missouri didn't welcome him warmly, so he watched his motorcycle even more closely. He paid the bill and stepped outside. 3 young men were hanging around while another sat on Chris's bike. Hey, get off my bike, Chris said firmly. Make me, the kid replied with a smirk, and his friends laughed. Chris responded quickly, striking the boy's face with his fist. One of the other boys threw a punch at Chris, but he easily dodged it and pushed the kid away. Let's keep this fair, Chris heard a man say, followed by the sound of a shotgun getting ready. The other 2 boys ran away, leaving their friends behind. You, the trucker said, pointing at the boy who had been on Chris's bike. You need to apologize for messing with his bike. Forget you, the kid mumbled, touching his sore mouth carefully. Thanks, Chris said genuinely. I'm a biker too, and I can't stand when kids think it's okay to just sit on bikes, the trucker said as he opened the door to his big truck. What's 1041 mean? He asked. That's when I decided to change my life, Chris replied. Take care, 1041, the trucker said, putting the shotgun back and heading inside the diner. My dad's a lawyer. He'll sue you, the kid with the sore mouth complained. Tell him to leave me alone, Chris said, starting his bike, spitting on the ground near the boy and driving away. He just left and Sandra can't find him. She called his phone, but he didn't pick up, Anne-Marie told Harriet. Still thinking about him, huh? Harriet asked. Anne-Marie paused, looked closely at her boss, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess I do. He's always been... Let me ask you, Harriet interrupted. Would you still feel this way if Mr. Wonderful hadn't hurt you? What do you mean? Anne-Marie asked. You know exactly what I mean, Harriet said with a chuckle. If Tom hadn't been such a scammer, would you still be hung up on Chris? Probably not, Anne-Marie admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. People are waiting for their fries, Harriet reminded Anne-Marie. Let them talk, Chris thought as he rode his bike into the motel room. He placed newspapers on the floor, even though he thought a grease mark might actually improve the old carpet. He parked the bike on the papers, knowing it shouldn't leak. He took good care of it, but he didn't want the motel blaming him for any damage. His phone buzzed, reminding him that he had at least one message. There were actually 5 messages from Sandra. The first was about her disappointment in him for leaving and not telling her. The second mentioned Anne-Marie's visit. The third was her checking on him. She had stopped by his apartment during lunch, and the friendly lady there said, "Mr. Chris isn't here. He left early for a motorbike ride and didn't tell anyone where he went." The fourth and fifth messages were work-related. Norman James had refused to accept his resignation and was insisting he return to work as soon as possible. "Tough luck," Chris said with a smile. "For the first time in years, I feel relaxed." "But I bet Charlie's worried, the little brown noser," Chris said as he lay down on the hard bed. After a long day biking, he fell asleep quickly and slept well until sunlight filled the room. Out of habit, Sandra opened the envelope addressed to Chris Dumas, and then remembered he wasn't there anymore. She set it aside with the other letters she had collected for him. Curiosity got the better of her, and she glanced through several photos of Nicole, a man she didn't recognize, and a baby. She guessed the young man was likely Nicole's future husband. In the last picture, the baby was lying on his back, smiling up at the photographer. "Oh, Chris, he's adorable," she said into her headset, leaving him another message. She quickly hung up when Norman James walked into the lobby, ignoring Sandra as he headed straight to Charlie's office. Sandra couldn't help but smile when Norman confronted Charlie about one of his careless emails. "This is a professional office. When I send a professional message, I expect a professional reply, not some cheeky response," Norman shouted. "Where is Dumas?" he snapped at Sandra. "Canada, last I heard," Sandra replied with a shrug. "Toronto, I think." "Bring him back here immediately," Norman ordered. "I tried. He said no," Sandra replied with a shrug. "No? Really?" Norman shouted, growing more frustrated. "That's what he said," Sandra said, watching as Norman's face turned even redder. "I don't care what it takes. You get him back here now," he yelled at her. "Tell him no. Better yet, put him on," Chris said with a smile as Sandra passed on the message. "Dumas, you have 24 hours to come back or—" Norman threatened. "What are you going to do? Fire me?" Chris laughed. "I've got about 7 months of vacation saved. How about I take a month off and then come back for a 20% raise?" 20? Norman asked. "You'll be lucky to get." 25, and it goes up each time you argue with me," Chris said. 20? Norman agreed. "And Sandra gets a 20% raise, too. You need to get Charlie Wertmuller away from me. I don't care if you take him to Houston, Nigeria, or Mexico City, just as long as I don't have to deal with him or his complaining wife again. Also, William Kennedy will take Charlie's old job. See you in August," Chris said, and hung up. Sandra felt a big wave of anger as she sat and watched the wedding at the gazebo in the condo complex. Now and then, Nicole would glance around, and Sandra saw a few tears roll down the girl's cheeks. When Chris returned, she planned to confront him about leaving his daughter like that. Sweet William sat beside her husband, Jimmy, and Sandra had to suppress a laugh. The large man, almost like a giant, was using a handkerchief to wipe his eyes as he watched little Nicole exchange her vows. "I am so upset with your father," Sandra said to Nicole at the small reception in the condo clubhouse. "Don't be," Nicole replied. "I've been letting him know for years that I don't care. I guess he's just showing me he doesn't care either." "That's not right," Anne-Marie added. "Mom, we've talked about this," Nicole replied, then laughed when Sophia's eyes lit up at the wedding cake, and the little girl began singing Happy Birthday to me. No, silly girl, it's not a birthday," she laughed and took Sophia over to the cake. "This cake is for the wedding," she signed to the girl. "I guess we better cut the cake before it gets chaotic, huh?" Fred said as he brought Freddie over, watching Sophia struggle to reach the large wedding cake. Everyone, Nicole called out over the DJ's music. "Change of plans. My sister wants cake, so we're cutting it now, okay?" "Chris would be really proud of his little girl," Sweet William said to Sandra. "Look at how caring she is with her sister." He was at a casino in Toronto that promised to bring Las Vegas to Canada when it struck him. He had never been to Las Vegas. Anne-Marie and her mother had gone many times for Mother's Day weekends, and when Nicole got older, the two women promised to take her along, but Chris had never been. Caesar's Palace, with its fountains, caught his interest. He remembered Evil Knievel trying to jump those very fountains, then recalled Robbie Knievel succeeding where his father had not. The small bar claimed to have everything, so he shrugged and stepped into the cool calm of the bar. The women there seemed young and nice-looking. He was aware of that. The old man was not getting all the attention because he was the best-looking person they had ever seen. They were more interested in the money in his wallet. "I have a modified Harley," he told Diamond when she noticed his helmet and asked about his bike. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked, leaning closer to him. "I finish work in an hour. My roommate already left." "Sure," he said, quickly choosing to drink soda instead of beer. Diamond was a tall brunette, looking a little worn out as if she had been doing this for a long time. When she came back, she wore tight blue jeans and a short top that showed off her figure. Suddenly, a stout man shouted, "What are you doing with my girlfriend?" He stood by Chris's motorcycle. Diamond gasped and moved closer to Chris, blocking his right arm. The stout man held a pipe. "Looks like you've done this before," Chris said, noticing Diamond clinging to him. He pushed his elbow back, trying to hit Diamond's stomach, but instead, he accidentally hit her ribs. She cried out in pain and fell to the ground. He then targeted the man's knee with his foot. His kick connected, and the man fell down. "Las Vegas Police Department," said an operator in a mechanical voice. "What is your emergency?" Chris realized that Glenda and David Falcone had clearly done this kind of thing before. He guessed this since the man was waiting right by his motorcycle, the only modified Harley around. Usually, Glenda would charm a client into giving her a ride, then call her brother. David would act like an angry boyfriend, knock the target out, and they would take the person's cash. Later, he returned a message from Sandra, who was upset with him. "And what could be more important than watching your daughter get married?" she demanded over the phone. "Fighting crime in Las Vegas," he chuckled. "Well, Mr. Smarty Pants," Sandra replied sharply, "you gave the bride and groom all those kitchen gifts." "That was very generous of me," he said casually. "Yes, almost as generous as the $5,000 you gave them," she pointed out. "5,000!" he exclaimed in shock. "Come on, Sandra." "Could have been less if you had been there," she said, ending the call. Meanwhile, another exploration company secured a contract with the Nigerian government, beating out PD. Norman James was very angry about their losses until the other company's workers were attacked by terrorists for working with the American devil. No one in Nigeria wanted to work for the American company, and the other company lost a lot of money. However, he didn't tell Chris that he was right to suggest not moving forward with the project. He also wouldn't admit that promoting William Kennedy from laborer to vice president of the Louisiana division had been a good choice. William's large size hid his smarts and business skills. "Oh my gosh, I just don't know how I will manage in this office with such stylish, well-dressed men," Sandra said while fanning herself as Chris and Sweet William walked in. They were both trying to outdress each other without saying it. Chris had a wardrobe full of tailored suits and little cotton clothing. He favored silk for his undergarments, and his shirts and ties were bright and colorful. Sweet William had a hard time finding clothes that fit his size but made the best of what he could find. "Just do your best," Chris smiled as he entered his office. Sandra had happily cleaned out everything Charlie left behind when he left, and put Chris's awards in new frames on the wall behind his desk. Photos of Freddie and Nicole's wedding were framed and placed right in front of Chris's desk, so he could see his daughter and grandson every time he looked up. He laughed when he tried to take the photos down and found that Sandra had glued them to the wall. "Oh, here's another one," Sandra said as she entered Chris's office, putting up a new framed picture of Freddie. "This is from his first birthday. Isn't he cute?" Chris looked up from the latest charts showing the path of a strong hurricane and squinted at the new picture. The little boy's face was covered with chocolate ice cream and birthday cake. "Wow, if he had any more chocolate on his face, people might think he's one of Sweet William's kids," Chris joked as he returned to his work. "Oh, no way, he isn't that cute," William replied, entering Chris's office in a bright orange sweatsuit. "Why do you wear that?" Chris asked, shielding his eyes from the color. "So no one messes with me," Sweet William said. "No more long runs like yesterday," Sandra warned. The day before, both men had gone for a run together. Neither wanted to admit they were tired, so they just kept going. They had walked nearly 5 miles when Chris suddenly burst into laughter, and Sweet William joined in. "My goodness, I have no idea where we are." Chris chuckled loudly. "Wow, let's head back. You can run behind me," Sweet William said with a smile. "Why should I do that?" Chris asked, turning to jog back in what he thought was the direction of the office. "Do you have gas?" "Because if people see a black man running behind a white guy, they might misunderstand the situation," Sweet William replied playfully. "And if they see me running after you, they might think I'm chasing a robber," Chris added, It's better if we run side by side. You two spent all yesterday complaining about how tired you are, Sandra said. How about using some common sense for a change? And where's the fun in that? Chris laughed, stepping out of his private bathroom dressed in a gray sweatsuit. What do you know about Muslims? Chris asked as they began to jog steadily. I know it's more than just a religion. It's a complete way of life, Sweet William replied. They take it very seriously. There's no in between. Why do you ask? Are you thinking about converting? No, my tenant upstairs says he's Muslim and his girlfriend is too, Chris explained. Aman Cabrera was the name he went by. It means scholar of integrity, he said with pride as he and Alicia Scanduro looked around apartment 3. I study the Quran. It's not just reading, it's studying. Okay, Chris said, not really interested in the name's meaning. Both were in their early to mid-20s but had little else in common. Aman was energetic and expressive, while Alicia was petite with pale skin and appeared quite fragile, even though she looked several months pregnant. She was quiet, keeping her head down. You are a queen, Aman proclaimed. Is this place fit for such a queen? I guess it's okay, she replied with a slight shrug. No, don't say I guess, he insisted. My queen deserves the best. Will she be happy here? Yeah, of all the places we've seen, this is the nicest, Alicia said, looking up for a brief moment. Chris noticed her delicate features. She was strikingly beautiful. Her light brown eyes sparkled, and her small nose complemented her lovely pout, even if her expression seemed muted. Her long hair had light streaks of blonde. She quickly looked down when she saw Chris watching her. Aman filled out the lease application with flair. Everything he did felt dramatic. Chris handed him one set of keys and turned to give the other set to Alicia. Aman quickly took the keys from his hand. Muslim women can't touch any man who isn't their husband or father, Aman explained. Are you Muslim too? Chris asked Alicia. I am, Aman replied briefly. Muslim or not, that kid is loud, Chris said. When he starts his car, it shakes the ground from that music. That's not about being Muslim. That's just a kid who doesn't care about anyone, Sweet William said as he turned to go back to the office. I've seen others act like that too. Oh, come on, you Baptist, Chris laughed. Want to know why you take two Baptists fishing? Sweet William asked. Why? Chris responded, walking alongside him. So they don't drink all your beer, Sweet William joked, and they both laughed. And I thought Muslims don't drink, Chris pondered aloud. They don't. At least the Muslims I know don't. It's against their beliefs, Sweet William affirmed. That's why in Iraq and Kuwait the liquor stores are run by Christians. Muslims stay away from alcohol. Well, every time he throws something into the dumpster, it makes a lot of noise, like beer bottles, Chris remarked. I doubt he drinks just apple juice. And he's living with his girlfriend? Sweet William asked. Yeah, a nice young woman, and she's about 6 months pregnant, Chris replied. Huh, Sweet William said. That doesn't seem right. Relationships outside of marriage are not allowed for Muslims. Should I call someone about it? Chris joked. Nah, he's busy hiding out, Sweet William laughed, speeding up just to tease Chris. Anne-Marie realized that with what she was paying in rent, she could instead buy a condominium. When number 1112 became available, she bought it and put it in Nicole's name. That lawyer was still around. Fred didn't say it, but he was glad to have his living room back. He appreciated being able to walk around at home without worrying about his appearance. The first thing I'm going to do is relax right here, he whispered to Nicole. Right on this couch. Stop it, she giggled and playfully pushed him away. Do you want me to watch Freddie so you can have some time alone together? Anne-Marie asked as she carried a box of toys down the stairs. You will leave some of her things here, right? Nicole asked, a bit worried. She wanted to have time with her husband but feared losing Sophia. Yes, dear. She has so many toys she doesn't even play with half of them, Anne-Marie replied, glancing around to ensure the little girl wasn't near. Sophia had wandered off once toward the pool. She really loved the pool. To reach the swimming pool, she usually went through the parking lot for a short distance. This was fine when Nicole, Fred, or Mommy were with her because they looked out for cars. But when she was by herself, it was risky since she couldn't hear any cars coming. Anne-Marie yelled when she realized the child had gotten out. Fred jumped up and ran out of the condo to find the child. Anne-Marie was almost in a panic when Fred came back, holding the upset child. So, do you want me to watch Freddie? Anne-Marie asked. Yes, Fred replied. Nicole hesitated, then agreed. Chris clenched his fists. He could hear loud music, which he didn't enjoy as he turned off his motorcycle. It seemed Aman was starting his weekend early. Chris picked up an empty box and tossed it into the dumpster, the name Coors Light printed on it. Muslim, huh? He scoffed. 2 hours later, Chris had a terrible headache from the constant thumping of Aman's music. He went upstairs and knocked loudly on the door of apartment 3. A drunk Aman opened the door and glared at Chris. What? He demanded. Could you turn that down a bit? Chris asked firmly. Why, is someone complaining? Aman asked. Yes, I am, Chris said. Aman looked surprised to learn Chris lived below him, then shut the door but turned the music down a little. Chris knocked again. What? Aman shouted. Lower it more, I'm tired and want to sleep, Chris said. I have the right to play my music, Aman argued, getting close to Chris. Back off now or you'll regret it, Chris replied, standing his ground. You can play your music, but not if it disturbs my peace. Aman, please, Alicia said gently. What? Aman shouted at her. You're on his side? No, I just want some quiet too, she said softly. All of you are disrespecting me in my own home, Aman muttered as he trudged over to the stereo and turned it off. That's not how you should speak to someone, Chris said as he walked away. Anne-Marie listened closely. There was no noise coming from the children's room. A quick look inside showed they were both fast asleep. She left the door open just in case they woke up and hurried down the hall to her bedroom. Her bed felt wonderful. She lay down and enjoyed the soft sheets against her skin. A moment later, she carefully took off her clothes and lay on the soft sheets. As she looked down at herself, she noticed that she wasn't the same slim woman she had been 3 years ago. Having a baby changes things, she said to herself, explaining the little extra weight she now had. Her figure wasn't as firm as it used to be. There were also several small marks on her pale skin. She reached down to touch her body gently. She felt a sense of warmth growing inside her and focused on the feeling, taking her time. When her stomach felt tight and ready for release, she quickly opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out a device she liked to use. Okay, here we go, she whispered as the feeling washed over her. She enjoyed it a few more times, feeling free to make noise without worrying about being overheard. It's the 3rd of the month, Chris said cheerfully. Yeah, about that, Aman replied, avoiding Chris's gaze. We had an unexpected expense come up, you know. But rent is something you expect, right? Chris replied. Right. So I can give you $300 now, and I'll pay the rest when I get my paycheck next week, okay? Aman suggested. The rent is $400 a month. It's in the agreement, Chris explained. You signed it. There's a late fee of $25 a day if it's not paid in full. You can't do this to me, Aman shouted. If it's not paid by the 10th, I will change the locks and put your belongings outside. That's what the lease says, Chris continued, ignoring Aman's protests. Chris turned and went back downstairs, not listening to Aman anymore. He made himself a meal with some crawfish that Cam Pow had given him, along with her rent payment. He was glad he had taken the cooking class, since he felt like cooking Chinese tonight, even though crawfish could also be used in Cajun or Mexican dishes. As he cooked, he could hear Aman above, talking loudly. He couldn't catch what Alicia was saying, which wasn't surprising because he rarely heard her. But Aman was growing louder, even though Chris couldn't understand his words. While heating oil to fry rice, he noticed a gentle knock at his door. Chris turned off the burner and walked towards the door. Who is it? He called out. He heard a muffled response but couldn't make out the words. Who? He repeated, raising his voice. Alicia, from upstairs, apartment 3, came the hesitant reply, this time a little clearer. Sighing, he opened the door just a crack, keeping the security chain on. He wasn't taking any chances, just in case this was some kind of trick. The chain was sturdy, attached securely to the reinforced door and frame, something he had made sure of after hearing too many stories about break-ins. Mr. Dumas, Aman sent me to see if maybe we could work out, some kind of arrangement? She asked, her voice quiet and unsure. Chris, irritated at being interrupted, shook his head. Yeah, the deal is Aman can come up with the rest of the rent no shortcuts. He closed the door and locked it again, twisting the deadbolt. Heading back to the stove, he was about to finish cooking when another knock came, this time more insistent. "Yes?" Chris asked, his patience wearing thin. "Please, Mr. Dumas, it's me, Alicia," she sobbed quietly. "Don't make me go back upstairs. I need help." Through the slightly opened door, Chris responded, trying to understand. "Let me get this straight. It's against his beliefs for me to even touch you, but it's not against his beliefs to send you down here to offer something like this?" Alicia stood in the small hallway, wiping away her tears. She looked worn out, and Chris couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She was clearly caught in a bad situation, her eyes pleading, her words struggling to come out. After a pause, Chris replied firmly, "Go back and tell Aman I'm not interested in anything like that, and remind him he's the one responsible for the rent, not you." He closed the door again and locked it. The situation weighed on his mind, but he knew better than to get involved in Aman's problems. As he returned to the kitchen to finish his meal, the knocking came again, this time more urgent. "Come in," Chris said firmly when he saw Alicia standing at the door, her lips split and trembling. She hesitated at his tone, but finally stepped inside. "That coward," Chris muttered under his breath, grabbing an ice cube and wrapping it in a paper towel. "Here," he said more gently, pressing the ice to her lip, cutting off her quiet attempts to offer something in exchange for the money Aman owed him. He led her to the leather love seat, making sure the door was locked behind them. Chris then returned to the kitchen, where he was preparing food. As usual, he'd made too much and began packing the leftovers into containers when he glanced at her again. "Have you eaten yet?" he asked. She shrugged in response. "What's that supposed to mean?" Chris asked, his voice a bit sharper. "Yes, no, maybe?" Alicia thought for a second, then shook her head and looked down at the coffee table. "All right, you like Chinese food?" he asked, letting out a sigh. "Yeah," she replied softly. "Aman doesn't like it. Says it's not clean, but I don't care what Aman likes or doesn't like." Chris cut her off. He quickly filled another plate and set it in front of her. Alicia looked at the food, then began eating hungrily, as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Careful, there's some spicy peppers in there," Chris warned. She nodded but kept eating, barely slowing down. After a few minutes, she looked up and asked, "Can I use your bathroom?" "Yeah, you know where it is," Chris said, watching her rush down the hall. The bathroom door remained open as she went inside, which made him smile a little. It reminded him of someone else, Nikki, who had a habit of doing the same thing, keeping the conversation going even while in the bathroom. Chris heard Alicia sigh, followed by the sound of the toilet flushing. Moments later, she came back to the table and sat down, resuming her meal. "I like your toilet paper, Mr. Dumas," she said with a small grin, then kept eating. Chris chuckled, remembering his manners. "Oh, sorry. What do you want to drink?" "I don't know. What do you have?" Alicia asked. "Please, just call me Chris," he said. "Let's see. I've got wine, beer, and some orange juice." "Can I have the wine?" she asked. Chris hesitated. "Aren't you pregnant?" "A little wine is fine. That's what the clinic told me," Alicia explained. But she also knew that the wine would help her feel braver. If Chris didn't let her work out a deal for the rent Aman owed, she wasn't sure what Aman would do next. He had been hitting her since they started dating. Then he would say he was sorry and promise not to do it again. This time was different. He did it hard enough to draw blood, and this time he didn't say he was sorry. She took a sip of her dry white wine, which paired nicely with the crawfish. "This is good," she said, referring to both the food and the wine. "Thanks. My friend in Crowley has a vineyard. He and his wife are from Italy, and they make their own wine. He also makes this drink called grappa from grape remains," Chris said. "Oh, cool," Alicia replied. "Do you have any?" "Right, Muslims don't drink," Chris said with a hint of sarcasm. "Come on, he acts Muslim only when it suits him. He skips prayers and eats pork whenever he feels like it," she replied sharply. Chris didn't react much to her words, his mind wandering. He noticed her outfit and the way it fit, but he quickly tried to focus back on the conversation. "Kids these days," he thought. "No one had tattoos when I was younger, except sailors and bikers." Alicia caught his gaze and smiled slightly. She then asked, "So, do you have any of that grappa?" "Yeah, finish your dinner and I'll pour you some," Chris offered. "Okay," Alicia replied, finishing the last bit of rice on her plate. He found the small shot glasses, grabbed the bottle, and poured 2 shots. "Want to make a toast?" she asked. "You're the guest. You go ahead," he smiled back. "To love," she said simply. They clinked their glasses and drank the liquor. "Wow, that's strong," she coughed, then laughed. "That's some stuff." "Definitely," he agreed, enjoying the taste. He cleaned up the dishes and put them in the small dishwasher. "Mr. Chris?" Alicia asked quietly. "Yes," he replied, preparing for a serious discussion. "Please, I need to talk about Aman. Can we work something out?" she pleaded. "Alicia, I've made it clear," Chris said with a sigh, grabbing a sponge to wipe the counter. "I told him what to expect, and he read the lease before signing it, right?" "Yeah, but then we had that issue come up," Alicia mumbled. "That's what I wanted to discuss," Chris said, turning to face her. She wasn't looking at him. Instead, she was fiddling with her shirt, seeming to lose focus on the conversation. She looked down at the table, staring at the empty shot glass. "Please stop that," he said with a smile, placing his hand over hers. "It's hard to think when you keep teasing me." "Like this?" she asked playfully, lifting her shirt slightly. "I like it," he replied honestly. "But about that unexpected cost, what was it?" "His dumb subwoofer broke," she replied angrily. "Oh, baby, I need my music. It's not the same without the bass." "Am I just supposed to wait for my rent because he needs his music fixed?" Chris asked, frustrated. "Uh-huh," Alicia said, realizing she might have said too much. Aman would not be happy. "Come on," Chris sighed and reached out to help her up. "Are we going to do it?" Alicia asked, sounding hopeful. "What? No, you're going to go tell him if he gets me the 100 tomorrow, I won't charge him the late fee," Chris said. "He'd rather not pay the 100, Alicia said. "And I'd rather not listen to his awful music, you know," Chris replied. "Thanks, mister." "Chris," Alicia said softly, giving him a quick kiss before leaving his apartment. He locked the door behind her and hurried to the bathroom, but didn't make it in time. He wondered what she had tattooed on her back. The large letters were almost visible through her shirt. It wasn't just the long hours. Anne-Marie felt tired even on her days off. Lately, carrying the heavy tray to the tables had become more challenging. "You look a bit worn out," Harriet said to Anne-Marie. "Yeah, I just don't know what's wrong with me," Anne-Marie replied. "I wake up feeling even more tired. Poor Nicole has to look after Sophia even when I'm home." "Aw, poor thing," Harriet teased, "and we all know how much she loves doing that." "Shut up," Anne-Marie laughed. "At least you have a babysitter nearby," Harriet smiled. "My boys would rather fight than help each other. Thank goodness for the military. Uncle Sam can look after them now." Anne-Marie forced a smile as George walked in. He was a regular and often asked her out. She liked the idea of dating and wished for someone to hold her close. George, however, was quite heavy and didn't always look after himself. "You know, I looked everywhere on this menu and your phone number isn't on here," George said when Anne-Marie asked what he wanted. "And it won't be. What do you want to eat?" Anne-Marie asked, suddenly feeling dizzy. "You okay?" "Do you need to sit down?" George asked, worried. "Hey, look," Aman said, fidgeting as Chris walked toward the mailboxes. "I thought we had a deal." "We do. I rent you a place, you pay the rent, and everybody's happy," Chris replied, checking his mail. "Right, but Alicia was at your place all night. All I get for that is no late fee? That's not fair," Aman said, upset. "Yeah, you're right, that isn't fair," Chris said. "So now you owe me the late fee. Happy?" "No way! I let you be with my girlfriend, and you're still going to charge me," Aman complained. "Listen, Aman," Chris said tightly. "I did not do anything with your girlfriend. Her name is not on the lease, yours is. Pay the rent. She was at your place all night, and you're saying nothing happened?" Aman scoffed. "Keep this up, and tomorrow's rent goes up even more," Chris warned, and shut the door in Aman's face. Chris clenched his jaw, hearing Aman yell upstairs. Aman's loud voice drowned out Alicia's soft replies. Then he heard a door slam, followed by silence. He nearly smiled when a soft knock came at his door. Looking through the peephole, he saw it wasn't Aman. "Yes?" he asked as he opened the door. "Mr. Chris," Alicia said. "Can we talk?" She fumbled her words. "Have you eaten?" he asked as he opened the door wider. "No, sir," she said, and took a seat at his small table with gratitude. She wore the same clothes as before. Chris noticed she might not have many outfits, especially maternity ones. "What are your tattoos of?" he asked. "The last girl I saw with tattoos had dragons." It's easier if I show you," she stuttered, her cheeks turning red. "No need for that," he said quickly while placing a plate of Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of her. "Would you like some wine?" "Yes, please," she replied with a smile. He poured her a generous glass of red wine from a friend's collection. She sipped it with appreciation. "Aman doesn't drink anything but beer," she said, "and he counts them to make sure I don't drink too much." "I'm not Aman," he said as he sat at the table with her. "I know," she said, placing her hand on his leg. He didn't move her hand but also didn't push it away. "This is really good," she said between bites. Chris poured the drinks as Alicia looked around. "Did you cook this?" she asked with a grin. "Do you see anyone else here?" He replied with a smile, and she laughed at herself. "To love," she said, raising her glass. "Amen," Chris said as they clinked their glasses together, sharing a moment of lightheartedness. Then, unexpectedly, Alicia pulled off her tank top, revealing several tattoos across her body. Chris's eyes widened in surprise. The tattoos were harsh and insulting, with words like dumb and ugly marking her body. She turned around to show more, exposing even more words across her back and legs. "Who made you get those?" Chris asked, stunned. "You think I wanted this?" Alicia snapped, angry at the thought. "No, I was in love, or at least I thought I was." She pulled her shorts back up, but then paused. "You want them on or off?" she asked. Chris hesitated before answering. "I think it's better if you put them back on." Alicia gave a small smile, though Chris noticed for the first time that she was missing a few teeth. She sat back down, her expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "Let me tell you something," she said. "I was head over heels for this guy, Tony. He wasn't really my uncle, but he was married to my aunt for a while. After their divorce, I started dating him. I thought we had something real, but it turns out he was just using me to get back at my dad. My dad hated him." She shook her head as if still grappling with the memories. "One day, Tony just left. I never saw him again. After that, I started dating Jimbo. He had this great Harley, and I thought we were really in love. But then one night he brought home this girl, April, and told me we were going to have a three-way. I wasn't having any of it." Alicia paused, her eyes darkening at the memory. "Next thing I know, April started attacking me, beating me up while Jimbo just stood there laughing. That's how I lost my teeth." She pointed to the gap in her smile and then continued. "After that, everything spiraled. Jimbo didn't care about me. He just enjoyed watching me get hurt." The room fell silent for a moment, both of them reflecting on the weight of her story. Chris didn't know what to say, but he could see how deeply her past had scarred her. I'm lying here feeling almost out of it, and suddenly she starts to, well, right on my face. Then she and Jimbo just leave me there on the floor and head into the bedroom. I can hear them, and it sounds like they are really into it. Chris felt sick. He knew Jimbo and April. He thought they were friends. To think they could treat someone like that, especially a nice young woman. "Anyway," Alicia continued. Chris noticed Alicia often said anyway. "Then April pulls me by my hair into the bedroom. She tells me she's a tattoo artist and that she did all those dragons on herself. She and Jimbo tie me up and she starts tattooing me while Jimbo tells her what to do. I'm crying and begging her to stop, and then out of nowhere he just forces me to. I can't believe that happened. After she finishes my front, they start. Nearby, and then April makes me clean up after her and spits at me because I'm not doing it right. They turn me on my stomach, and she does my back. Then Jimbo puts me in a way that I really hate. It's just so wrong. And then they invite their friends over, and I think I passed out or they must have done something to me because everything goes blank after that. Sweetheart, maybe you should get dressed again." Chris sighed, the idea of being with this girl feeling far away now. "Anyway," Alicia said as she put her shorts back on and pulled her shirt over her scars. "Next thing I know, I'm on the side of the road. A truck driver picks me up and we head to Washington. When we get there, he tells me I have to ride with Tiny Tim. I'm with him for a year or two, and then I find out he's been married the whole time. I feel so hurt and betrayed, and in the heat of the moment, he pushes me out of his truck while it's going fast. I wake up in a hospital and there's Aman saying, "Oh, you are my queen, you are my destiny," and I'm like, "Whatever." Chris smirked as he spotted Aman outside, trying to look into his apartment. Good thing he had Alicia put her clothes back on. "Anyway, Aman making me come here to meet you isn't surprising," Alicia said, still sounding distant. "What about your mom and dad?" Chris asked her. "They," Alicia started, and then lowered her head. "My dad says I'm going to live poorly. They don't really understand me." "Well, if it helps at all, Jimbo's in a wheelchair now," Chris replied. "No," Alicia gasped, alarmed. "Why would that help? Oh, that poor man." "What about April?" Alicia asked. Chris shrugged. "Probably taking care of him, I guess." "Well, thank God she's there to help him out," Alicia said sincerely. Nicole glanced at her mother, noticing how tired she looked. Fred dismissed Anne-Marie's apologies and took the wheel of the car with Nicole following behind. Freddie was already asleep in his car seat, and Sophia was struggling to stay awake but was clearly losing the battle. "Do you want us to keep Sophia overnight?" Fred offered kindly. Anne-Marie, overwhelmed, burst into tears. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm so exhausted," Fred comforted her. "No need to apologize. That's what family is for." "Harriet said I can have tomorrow off," Anne-Marie added, wiping her eyes. "Why don't you and Nicole drop the kids off with us and have a day just for yourselves?" Fred smiled but shook his head. "I've got work, but thank you." Later, Chris unlocked the door to his apartment when Aman confronted him. "You're rich! Why are you all over me about the rent?" Aman complained. Chris remained calm. "What I earn doesn't matter. You signed a lease and agreed to pay. You still owe me." "I don't see why you're making such a big deal. You've got enough money," Aman said angrily. "Again, it's not about what I have. You owe rent, so pay it or leave," Chris replied firmly, and then closed the door. A soft knock came shortly after, and Chris smiled, though he still checked the peephole just in case Aman was trying something. But it wasn't him. "Hi, Mr. Chris," Alicia greeted him with a warm smile. "Hi," he replied, giving her a gentle kiss. He locked the door and led her to the dining table. "Hope you like lasagna," she laughed. "Lasagna's in my blood, Chris. My family practically invented it." "Calling me boy?" Chris teased, raising an eyebrow. "I'm a man, don't forget that." Alicia grinned playfully. "Whatever," she said with a laugh. After their meal and a few drinks, Chris led her by the hand to his room. She seemed happy and comfortable, smiling as she moved around, removing her t-shirt and shorts. "Oh my God," she whispered as Chris undressed. "You look amazing, Mr. Chris." She quickly went to the bathroom, grabbing a small, wet cloth. "Lay down," she said with a smile, gently wiping his arms. "I just don't like the taste of that deodorant." Chris chuckled softly, and she playfully swatted his hands as they joked with each other. Their moment was sweet and tender, filled with light teasing and soft kisses as they lay together. She kissed him gently, then playfully nipped at his neck and shoulders, showing her affection in her own unique way. She gently kissed Chris on the lips, then moved her way down his chest with soft kisses, showing affection. She moved about on the bed, her focus entirely on him. By the time she reached his hips, the tension in the air was clear, but their connection was tender. She looked up at him and smiled. "You're doing great," she whispered as she continued to make him feel comfortable. Later, after they had shared a moment together, she teased, "Oh, you've made quite the mess." She chuckled lightly, then sat up, wiping off his skin with a soft cloth. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," she said, making sure everything was clean before they both relaxed. Later that day, Aman came downstairs, clearly frustrated. He threw a crumpled $100 bill into Chris's hand. "Here," Aman snapped. "No more complaints about the rent being late." Chris smiled calmly, pocketing the bill. "Good. See you next month," Aman muttered under his breath as he stomped back upstairs, slamming the door behind him. Once inside, Aman turned his frustration toward Alicia. "You're not going back down there anymore, understand?" "Sure, whatever," Alicia responded, turning off the TV without much concern. "I'm serious. If you go down there again, you better stay down there," Aman shouted. Ignoring him, Alicia looked around. "What do we have to eat?" "What?" Aman asked, surprised. "I said, what do we have to eat?" she repeated. Aman opened the fridge and looked inside. I don't know, let me check. There's nothing in there, Alicia said, her voice full of disappointment. It was empty this morning and nothing's changed since then. What did you expect? Aman's frustration boiled over and he lashed out in anger, slapping her across the face. Alicia blinked back tears but stayed calm, refusing to let his anger get the best of her. Slowly she stood up from the chair and walked toward the door, smirking despite the sting. Where do you think you're going? Aman yelled after her. Downstairs, she replied, smirking. At least Mr. Chris has food, and he doesn't have to act like this to feel in control. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks as she gathered her things, including the maternity clothes Aman had bought for her. Despite everything, she decided she needed to take care of herself no matter what. She put on the bright red dress and felt how soft and cozy it was. And tomorrow I'll take the car. We can go get you some shoes. That barefoot and pregnant idea is just silly, Chris said as she walked to the door carrying her things. Thank you, Mr. Chris, she said again. Aman had drunk a lot while she was downstairs and looked upset when she came back to the apartment. Feeling numb, she lay on the bed and let him in. In the back of her mind, she thought about how Aman would feel if he knew the real reason she felt this way. Mom, you really need to see a doctor, Nicole said with concern as Anne-Marie came in, carrying a very upset Sophia. Sure, Anne-Marie replied, but every extra penny I have is going to that lawyer. Do you have money for a doctor just lying around? So who's the new friend? Sweet William asked. Who says I have a new friend? Chris replied as he put on his jogging shoes. Come on, every time you have a new lady friend, you start eating those peppermint candies like there's no tomorrow, Sweet William laughed. I was just trying to get through, Chris admitted. Yeah, it would be easier for you to find a way around it, Sweet William chuckled as they started jogging at a slow pace. Sure, but that doesn't help my situation, does it? Chris replied. You're just being silly now, Sweet William laughed. Sandra looked up as Nicole walked in quickly. I need to see my dad, Nicole said firmly. Come on in, Chris said calmly from his doorway. He listened as Nicole shared everything on her mind. If Alicia came to you and needed anything, he thought while Nicole kept talking, you would help her in a heartbeat. And for once, she's not asking for herself. How much do you need? He suddenly asked. What? Nicole was surprised. You've asked me for money a few times, but I need a specific amount, Chris said. Well, I just want Mom to be able to see a doctor and find out what's wrong, Nicole stammered. She thought her dad would argue more. Okay, he replied. She watched as he wrote a check and slid it to her. That should be enough, right? He said, clicking on his computer. Have a nice day. Is this for 1,000? She asked, surprised. Yes, he said. Now, if you don't mind, I'm quite busy. Anne-Marie was upset that Nicole had asked Chris for help. Wait, how much? She asked when Nicole told her the amount. And he made it out to you, so I can't cash it, Nicole laughed. You've got no excuse now. You need to see a doctor, Chris said firmly. Alicia sighed with relief as the saleswoman removed her old, worn sneakers and slid a pair of comfortable walking shoes onto her feet. How do they feel, sweetheart? The saleswoman asked, smiling as Alicia stood up and took a few steps. What do you think, Mr. Chris? Alicia asked, lifting the hem of her light blue dress so he could see her feet. They may not be the prettiest shoes, but how do they feel? Chris asked. They feel great, Alicia admitted. Then we'll take them, Chris told the saleswoman. They also bought her a pair of slippers for the apartment. Alicia rested her head on Chris's arm as he paid, and though the saleswoman smiled, she quietly judged the scene. She thought, he's old enough to be her father. The saleswoman felt a twinge of regret. Chris had once asked her out to dinner a few months back, and now she was kicking herself for not saying yes. Well, you snooze, you lose, she thought, watching Alicia cling to Chris as they left the store. As they walked out, Chris mentioned, you should probably get a bra, too. But I don't like wearing one, Alicia whispered. Oh, okay, Chris said, and they left the department store without further discussion. Wasn't that kind of him? Harriet remarked during the busy dinner rush. Yeah, Anne-Marie replied, moving slowly toward her table. All right, who ordered the meatloaf sandwich? How'd you get your skin so smooth? Chris asked as they shared a quiet moment. Electrolysis, Alicia answered with a smile, appreciating his curiosity. They laughed and joked as they enjoyed each other's company, the atmosphere light and comfortable. Later, Alicia giggled as she pulled Chris into the bathroom. "I need to freshen up," she said playfully. They continued chatting and sharing a light-hearted moment together before the day ended. "Don't forget, you've got an appointment with Dr. Wellman tomorrow," Nicole reminded Anne-Marie as she helped her into the passenger seat. "Fine, fine," Anne-Marie mumbled, already half asleep before Nicole even started the car. When they got home, Nicole called Fred to help. "Help me get her to the couch," she said. Fred quickly unfolded the pull-out bed and helped settle Anne-Marie in. That night, Alicia didn't come down for dinner. Chris almost went upstairs to check on her, worried if she was okay, but he decided to give her some space for the evening. Aman had the music turned up very loud, shaking the ground. He sighed as he put the leftover steak and vegetables into a container, thinking it would be good for lunch tomorrow. Alicia tried to smile. Aman was making an effort. He chatted away as he cooked the hamburgers and made a mess of the potato salad by adding too much pickle relish. But he was trying. He wanted to win her heart again. She just couldn't bring herself to say it wouldn't work. She had stopped loving him the first time he was rough with her. When she found out she was going to have a baby, any hope for love disappeared. Aman was not the man she wanted near her child. He acted like a good Muslim when it suited him, drank when he wanted, and was controlling all the time. If their child was a boy, she worried about the views Aman would teach him. If it was a girl, she feared the hardships the child would face. It was bad enough for her, but she didn't want her child to suffer too. She thought she was in love with Mr. Chris. A warm feeling filled her when she imagined being with him. She smiled, thinking about just sitting on his couch and talking together. Aman interrupted her thoughts by putting a plate down dramatically in front of her. "There, my queen, see if that's good enough for you," he said. It wasn't. She didn't like when he burned the meat, and the potato salad was almost unappetizing. Still, she forced a smile and ate. That night he wanted to be close, but the meal had given her bad heartburn. He didn't believe her, so she put up with his awkward touches. "See that? When I'm with my queen, she stays," he said with a smirk. At 10:01, Chris knocked on the ceiling to ask Aman to turn the music down. With a grin, Aman turned it up for a moment, just to show who was in charge, then switched it off. Nicole was busy helping Anne-Marie fill out a long form while keeping Sophia and Freddie entertained. Anne-Marie looked at her daughter as the nurse called for her. Nicole sighed, gathered the two kids, and followed her mom through the hallways. She looked away, feeling shy, as her mom changed into a paper gown. "Why do they have you do this?" Anne-Marie asked as she finally managed to put on the gown and sit on the table. "So we can cover our costs," the doctor joked as he came in. "No documents, no trail to follow, understand?" "Ha ha," Anne-Marie replied with a smile. "So you've been feeling tired, weak, and low on energy?" Dr. Wellman asked while looking at the chart. "Yes," Nicole answered for her mother. "Some mornings she can't even get out of bed alone and can't drive anymore. She just doesn't have the strength." "And you're a waitress at— Oh, I love that place," Dr. Wellman exclaimed. "I knew I recognized you." Anne-Marie laughed. Yes, that place isn't the healthiest." Dr. Wellman chuckled. "But I can't resist it. I just love going there." He did the usual checkup and then ordered some blood tests. "I know you want quick answers," he said kindly. "I could give you a booster shot. In fact, why don't I do that? But I really want to wait for the lab results first, okay?" "Okay," Anne-Marie agreed. "Great to see you. Hopefully we'll get you feeling better soon," he said as he left. The booster shot, which was just vitamins, didn't give Anne-Marie the energy she wanted. It only made her feel restless and irritable. Aman was angry when he got home and didn't see Alicia. He wasn't sure, but he had a good idea of where she was. "Oh, God," Alicia sighed as she knelt next to Mr. Chris. "Want me to stop?" he joked. No, she replied, feeling overwhelmed. "Are you sure?" he teased. "Oh, come on," she exclaimed. "Okay if I must," he said playfully and moved behind her. She gasped with surprise as he lifted her easily and carried her into the kitchen. "I've always wanted to do this," he whispered, before setting her on the counter. "Yes," she sighed. She wrapped her arms around him and shared kisses as he moved closer, then pulled back. "You are amazing," she whispered to him. "Not as amazing as you," he replied softly. Anne-Marie, Fred said as they sat at the table eating dinner. I've been talking to Nicole, and we think it's best if you sold that condo and moved back here. I know you like having your own place, but it's not really... Okay, Anne-Marie said, too tired to argue. She would call the real estate agent on Monday. The agent had mentioned visiting from time to time, but Anne-Marie wasn't interested in that. However, she was sure the agent would be happy to hear from her. They didn't say anything as she slowly went upstairs and entered apartment 3. She stumbled slowly to the bathroom and took off her pretty lacy top and blue jeans before starting the shower. After she finished, she put on the soft nightgown and fuzzy slippers Mr. Chris had given her and shuffled out of the bathroom. He was still on the old couch, looking at her with tired eyes. The many beer bottles around him showed he had been drinking a lot, but he was still aware enough to cause trouble if he wanted to. If you're going to hurt me, just do it quickly, she said, feeling defeated. He stayed still, and after a long pause, she sighed and lay down on the uneven bed, trying to find a comfortable position before finally drifting off to sleep. Dr. Horace Wellman sighed deeply as he looked at the test results again. He would wait for the official report from the lab, but he already had a good idea of what it would say. It doesn't seem fair, but I have to accept it, he said out loud. Julie, his nurse, gently rubbed his back and then patted his shoulder. You need to eat. It's not good for you to skip meals like this, she reminded him. Always reminding me, he said with a smile. And what would you tell your patients? She asked. Good nutrition is as important as breathing and drinking, he replied, standing up. Even more important than exercise. You could do a lot of push-ups, but it won't help if you're only eating junk food. How's that? Very true, she agreed. Now let's get something to eat. Wait, let me make sure I heard you right, Sweet William said as they eased into a steady pace. You're seeing someone else's partner? Yeah, the kid upstairs, Chris admitted. That loud guy from upstairs? Yeah, the same one, Sweet William replied. Isn't that part of what caused the problems between you and Anne-Marie? She cheated on you, so why are you doing the same with someone else's girlfriend? Hey, I didn't ask for this. He sent her down here because he owed me rent, Chris explained. So it's okay if it's someone else's girl, but it's not okay if it's yours, huh? William remarked. Man, forget it. I shouldn't have told you anything, Chris said, clearly frustrated. Aman stopped by his grandmother's house after work. Hey, Jordan, his brother greeted him. How many times do I have to tell you? In the Nation of Islam, I go by Aman, he snapped. Whatever, man. You were born Jordan, and that's who you'll always be, Jerome shot back. I need to talk to you, Aman said, nodding toward the back of the house. Still with that girl? Jerome asked. Man, come on, Aman replied, annoyed. Jerome laughed. If you get tired of her, send her my way. Alicia kissed Chris goodbye and promised to be back in 30 minutes for dinner. I've got a surprise for you, she said with a grin. I'll bring it down in a bit, okay? Sounds good, Chris replied, exchanging a few more quick kisses with her before she left. As she drizzled chocolate syrup onto a bundt cake, she daydreamed about making dinner extra special for Chris. But Chris's peaceful evening was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. He sighed as he opened it to find Aman, clearly under the influence of something. Yeah, that's right, Aman muttered aggressively, a wild look in his eyes. Before Chris could react, he saw the gun in Aman's hand. Without hesitation, Chris slammed the door shut just as Aman squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the small hallway, the sound deafening. Chris dived into the closet, heart racing, as bullets tore through his door and ricocheted around the room. Shaking, he grabbed his phone and frantically dialed 911. Alicia, hearing the shots from upstairs, rushed out of her apartment, peeking over the banister to see what was happening. Her heart sank when she saw Aman firing at Chris's door, though she couldn't tell if Chris had been hurt. Aman, noticing her, pointed the gun upward and fired again. Alicia screamed and quickly retreated, slamming her door behind her. The noise rang in her ears, fear gripping her as she wondered what might happen next. Meanwhile, Aman, with a twisted grin of satisfaction, turned and walked away, pleased with the chaos he had caused. He would go up there soon to help her, once and for all. Kan Pao heard loud explosions as the soldiers destroyed the hospital. No more, she promised and grabbed her stick. No more. I will fight until my last breath. Aman heard a door open behind him and a frightened woman yelling in a language he didn't understand. He turned as she rushed at him, stick aimed right at him. His first shot struck her shoulder, but she kept coming. The second and third shots hit her head, and she fell down. Her artificial leg collapsed, and her stick accidentally pierced Aman's chest. Blood began to spray around the small hallway. "Brother, help me," he gasped, looking up at the police officer nearby. Jordan Kirkpatrick, also known as Aman Cabrera, passed away on the way to the University Medical Center, the same hospital where he worked. Nicole kept Sophia and Freddie company as they waited. At last, Julie arrived and called for Anne-Marie. "Miss Campion, I'm very sorry," Dr. Wellman said earnestly. Nicole and Anne-Marie listened as he spoke about making Anne-Marie's remaining time comfortable and how sorry he was that the illness was tough to treat for someone her age. His words didn't seem to make sense to either of them. "But I just turned 40, Anne-Marie exclaimed. 41, Mama, Nicole gently reminded her. Really? Anne-Marie asked, still struggling to understand what Dr. Wellman was saying. I know I'm giving you difficult news, Dr. Wellman told Nicole. She could see honesty in his eyes and nodded in thanks. How long do we have? Nicole finally asked. Not more than a year, he estimated. But realistically, I'd be surprised if you make it another 6 months. And what should I do now? Nicole asked him over her mother's loud cries. Jordan's family came to his apartment trying to take everything they could, furniture, stereo, and cookware, claiming it belonged to them. Jerome even tried to get too close to Alicia while their grandmother said nothing. What is happening here? Chris asked angrily from the doorway. Oh, no, he replied. If you say you own all of this, then you also own Aman's bills. You can take his things when you pay for my door, my window, my refrigerator, my mirror, and fixing the stairs and the foyer. Until then, stay off my property. I'll be back for you, Jerome grinned, showing Alicia all his gold teeth, making it clear he had money to take care of her. Don't, Anne-Marie said as Nicole mentioned calling her father. He doesn't. It's not his issue. She decided that the arrogant lawyer who managed her divorce would be the one to prepare her will. She believed the lawyer handling Hank's case was dishonest and would not care about Nicole's or Sophia's needs. Mr. McGregor joked that he could have chosen to be a priest or a lawyer, but he thought he did not look good in black, so he became a lawyer. At least he's Catholic, Anne-Marie sighed as she dialed his office number. Alicia woke up feeling unwell. Suddenly, a sharp pain hit her in the belly and she gasped. She struggled to catch her breath and then fell back to sleep. When she woke again, another pain struck her and she felt scared. Finally, she reached under the bed with her feet and found her cozy slippers. She appreciated her slippers. They were always there within reach. As a third pain hit, she took a deep breath and stumbled to the door. Chris woke up to urgent knocks on his door. Mr. Chris, please help me, Alicia cried in fear. He led her to his bed and helped her lie down. It seems like you might be going into labor, he said, gently wiping her sweaty face with a cool cloth. Oh, she groaned softly. Which hospital do you go to? He asked her. I don't know, she replied. Whatever hospital the clinic uses, I guess. The free clinic? On Wirt Street? He asked. Yeah, she said. Then that would be UMC, he said a bit tightly. But you're not going there. You're going to Women and Children's. I can't afford it, she said hesitantly. But I can, he replied, kissing her forehead. Let me get your shoes. You can't go to the hospital in slippers. Where are Aman's car keys? On top of the dresser, Alicia said, with his wallet in the evidence bag. Oh? He said playfully. Think there's any rent in there? He quickly went upstairs to get her shoes, sweatpants, and a shirt. He found Aman's keys and put them in his pocket. He locked the door and hurried back down. Alicia was sound asleep when he returned to his apartment. He placed her things on the chair, changed out of his jeans and shirt, then slipped back into bed beside her. I love you, she whispered, before falling asleep again. Okay, you have my business card, he reminded her, giving her a gentle kiss before leaving. She settled back into his comfortable bed and was asleep before the sound of his motorcycle faded away. Michael Christopher Dumas, Jr., Sandra exclaimed, upset. You turn around and take that young woman to the hospital. This could be her first baby. She might already be in labor. Alicia smiled as she looked around. She was in his apartment. She rolled around in his bed, enjoying the soft sheets and the comforting smell. Suddenly, she felt a strong urge to go to the bathroom and hurried there. "Oh, no!" she gasped as a sharp pain hit her. "I'm here," she heard his calming voice. His hands were on her, providing comfort. "Who's her doctor?" the nurse asked while Chris rushed Alicia into the lobby. "She doesn't have one. Get the closest one, I'm paying," Chris said. "Don't worry, it'll be okay," the nurse told the scared Alicia. If she thought Aman was a reckless driver, she was not ready for Chris, who was both worried and frantic. As they approached the familiar hospital, Chris remembered little Mikey's face. Mikey had been born in this hospital and never got a first birthday card. "Please, Nicole," Anne-Marie pleaded, "could you take care of that?" "Already done," Nicole smiled and pointed to the cake in the refrigerator. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Thank Fred. He's the one who got it," Nicole replied. "You have a great man," Anne-Marie said wearily. "Don't tell him that," Nicole grinned. "What's going on?" Fred asked as he walked down the stairs. Danny Scanduro looked up as a well-dressed man turned from the teller window and approached him. He smiled and stood to greet the potential client. "I'm Danny Scanduro, the loan officer here," he said, reaching out his hand. "Okay," Chris replied, shaking his hand quickly before pulling out a photograph. "And how can I help you, mister?" Danny asked. "This is a picture of my grandson, Christopher Michael Scanduro, born yesterday at 4:30, Chris said, handing the photo to Danny and leaving the bank. "Yes?" Cindy Scanduro asked with a cautious smile as she stepped out from the room she shared with 4 other credit consultants. "Here's a picture of your grandson, Christopher Michael Scanduro, born yesterday at 4:30, Chris said again, giving her the photo of a lovely little redhead before leaving. "So I guess Tiny Tim is the father, not Aman," Alicia thought aloud while holding her baby boy. "Beautiful doesn't even begin to describe him," Cindy said to her husband. "Yeah," he agreed, not sounding very enthusiastic. They sang happy birthday, and Sophia laughed with joy. She loved birthdays. They meant cake and ice cream. "Make a wish," Anne-Marie said, smiling. Inside, she felt far from happy. She was tired and wanted to rest, almost in tears from exhaustion. But today was Sophia's 3rd birthday, and it might be the last party she would ever see. McGregor quickly filled out the forms for her, making the right sounds of understanding. He seemed surprised about the lawsuit regarding Hank Campion's death. He promised he would look into it for her, without charging her anything. "Yes, ma'am, I am a lawyer, but I don't believe in taking advantage of anyone," he said with a small smile. "In the end, we all answer to a higher power, and I want to be ready for that." Suddenly, the other lawyer stopped making demands. True to form, Sophia was more focused on the cake and ice cream rather than the gifts. "Little pig," Nicole joked as Sophia pointed to the large rose on the cake, insisting on having that piece for herself. Danny entered the room and saw his daughter and grandson. After not seeing her for 2 years, he felt a mix of shock and disappointment. She was feeding the baby, and the tattoo on her arm was clearly visible. The gap in her teeth also stood out as she chatted happily with her child. When she noticed the look on her father's face, she lowered her head in shame. "So, who was that guy at the bank yesterday?" Danny asked, trying to sound cheerful. "The one who gave me the picture of Chris?" "Christopher Michael," Alicia replied with a shrug. "I don't know. Probably Chris. What did he look like?" She smiled as her father described Chris to her. "Yep, that's Chris Dumas," she said happily. "Is he the baby's father?" Danny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No, he's not," Alicia said, shaking her head. "Hey, I'm here to see my grandson," Cindy said with a smile as she brought in a somewhat reluctant Bobby. Oh my gosh, he's so cute," Sandra exclaimed when Chris showed her the picture of Christopher Michael. "Uh-huh." Chris pretended to be uninterested as he closed the locket and put it back in its box. "Oh, can you please glue this one to my wall? I can't move anything because of you." "That's the whole point," Sandra admitted as she rushed into Chris's office. "Oh, I think we'll start a whole new wall for Christopher Michael Dumas," she said while hammering a nail into the wall next to Chris. "It's Christopher Michael Scanduro," Chris corrected, carrying a cup of coffee into the office. "Uh-huh," Sandra replied, sticking the picture to the wall. "What's all this noise about?" Sweet William asked as he walked in. Chris's son, Sandra said, pointing to the picture of the little redhead. That is not my, Chris protested. Don't ask me if it's cute. All babies can be kind of strange looking, Sweet William said, squinting at the picture. They are not, Sandra squealed, playfully hitting his arm. Nicole was unsure whether to laugh or cry when she realized her period was late. Right now, taking care of Mama, Freddie, and Sophia was exhausting for her. Oh well, you're the one who said don't worry about it when he mentioned you were out of supplies, she sighed, a smile creeping onto her face. Danny felt angry as he watched the man kiss his daughter in what seemed like an overly familiar way. Oh, thank you so much, Alicia cheered when Chris gave her the locket with a picture of Christopher Michael inside. Danny cleared his throat and walked into the room. Alicia tossed her hair aside as Chris put the chain around her neck. He couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling about his daughter's choices. Hi, Daddy, Alicia said, showing her smile with a gap in her teeth. Chris nodded at Danny and the two men shared a tense look. Get your hands off my daughter, Danny wanted to say, but he stayed quiet. It felt like an unspoken agreement. Alicia would continue to live upstairs right above him, even though she spent most of her time in his apartment. Whenever she heard his motorcycle coming home, she would bring Christopher Michael downstairs, smiling widely. Inside his apartment, he'd hold her and whisper sweet things in her ear. If the baby was awake, he'd play with him, and then cook dinner while she shared stories about her day, or they'd talk about his work. She would feed Christopher Michael in front of him, ensuring he saw her caring for the baby. After dinner, they would sit together and watch TV. He had mounted a screen on the wall. Around 10, he would gently send her back upstairs so he could sleep. Then she would carry Christopher Michael upstairs, lay him in the crib Chris had bought, slip into her bed, and cry herself to sleep. She told him she loved him, saying, "Chris, I love you," to which he smiled and hugged her, thanking her. Why didn't he feel the same way? Every time she left, he wanted to say, "Don't go yet," but he stayed quiet. He was much older than her, and felt he had nothing to give this lovely girl. Why she spent her evenings with him was a mystery, but he was thankful she did. When she said she loved him, he wanted to express his feelings for her and for Christopher Michael, but he held back. He thought it would just make him look foolish. And after his past experiences, he wasn't eager to feel that way again. And there's no fool like an old fool, he reminded himself. The windows of her apartment were covered in frost from the chilly November air. He looked up at her kitchen window and smiled broadly. She'd written, "I love you," inside a heart on the glass. He noticed her waving to him and waved back. Danny smiled lightly as Cindy excitedly ran around getting gifts for the baby and her daughter. They hadn't had Alicia at their home for 4 Christmases, and Cindy was determined not to let another one go by without her little girl. Part of him felt a sense of relief. For 3 years, he had feared she might be gone. It was an emotional moment when he learned that she was indeed alive and living just a few miles away. Then he found out she was living with someone else. Thankfully, the baby didn't share that background. Now, she was a different person, changed in ways he hadn't expected. But at least the baby was fine. He looked up and saw Webster Buddy Webb enter the bank. Buddy and Alicia had gone to high school together. He had been Alicia's date for the senior prom. "Hi, Mr. Scanduro," the young man said politely. "I'm sorry," Anne-Marie cried as Nicole wiped her face. "About what?" Nicole asked, holding her mother's hand tightly. "I can't even take care of myself," Anne-Marie wept. "It's okay," Fred said, his eyes filling with tears. "And I won't get to see my new grandbaby," Anne-Marie said sadly. "But he knows you love him," Fred responded gently. "Her," Nicole corrected. "It's a her." "No way," Fred playfully disagreed. "Oh, be quiet," Nicole laughed at her husband's teasing. "Make me," Fred challenged with a grin. "Can't. I just went to the bathroom," Nicole replied quickly. Nicole smiled as Anne-Marie watched the two of them joke around. "Okay, where? Bed or?" Fred asked. "Bed," Anne-Marie said, and Fred carefully helped her onto the hospital bed they had set up in their living room. "Okay, I got a surprise for you," he said, turning on the television. He inserted a disc, and Anne-Marie watched her daughter, Sophia, sitting in a chair with a book. She was signing to Freddie, who lay in his crib, paying close attention. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," Sophia signed with enthusiasm, then glanced back at the book for the next line. my gosh," Anne-Marie gasped as she watched her 3-year-old daughter reading and signing. Fred had added soft piano music to fill the silent scene. "She's reading him a story," Fred said proudly. "Can you believe it? She's only 3 and she's telling him a bedtime story." "And we all know who taught her to read," Nicole added proudly as she held Anne-Marie's hand. "That's so beautiful," Anne-Marie whispered, watching Sophia sign the story to her little nephew. "She read the whole book to him," Fred said as they watched the little girl reading and signing. Alicia wiped away her tears and closed the lid on the last box her mother had brought over. Not having much to pack, it didn't take long. "Ready?" Cindy asked with a bright smile. Alicia nodded yes. Cindy knew Danny wouldn't be happy, but she didn't mind. Alicia was their daughter and she belonged with her family. So did their grandson. Usually, Cindy let Danny make all the choices, but not this time. This time, she was standing her ground. Alicia looked at the door of apartment 1 and felt a lump in her throat. She had thought he cared for her, but he never said it. She had believed Uncle Tony loved her, but he was just taking advantage of her. When he was done, he left her behind. She thought Jimbo cared for her too, but he just used her and let his friends do the same. Then he moved on. Tiny Tim had even tried to push her out of a moving truck. So maybe it was best to leave now before Chris did something similar. She had to think of her baby. She forced a smile and opened the outer door to the apartment building. He waited for her to come down, then decided to go upstairs to see what was taking so long. A cold feeling washed over him as he looked around the apartment. Then everything went dark. It seemed like a long time before he woke up on the floor. He looked around again. The bed, the weak chest of drawers, and the old couch were still there, but everything else was gone. All of Christopher Michael's clothes, toys, crib, stroller, and car seat were missing, and she hadn't even said goodbye. She claimed to love him, but didn't bother to say goodbye. Numbly, he went downstairs, had his dinner, then went back up to clean the apartment, getting it ready for someone new. Danny clenched his jaw as his daughter, his tattooed girl, walked into the kitchen with the baby. He held back his frustration as Cindy cheerfully welcomed Alicia and Christopher Michael. Suddenly, he got up and left the room. Alicia blinked back tears as she heard the front door slam. If Cindy noticed, she didn't show it as she continued her cheerful chatter with her grandson. Sandra put her cup of coffee down on the desk, listening to Chris's shower running. He and Sweet William had just done a 5-mile run in the cold December air. "Don't come to me when you both get sick," she had warned as they came in, soaked with sweat. As she turned to leave his office, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone crying. She rushed out of his office, her own eyes filling with tears. "It's your own fault, Michael Christopher Dumas," she whispered. "You let that girl go." On Christmas morning, Anne-Marie watched from her bed as Sophia tore open her gifts and proudly showed her everything Santa had brought. Freddie was just 2 years old. He didn't really understand what was happening, but he loved being part of the excitement. "And do you know why we get presents?" Fred asked the 2 children. "Jesus loves me," Sophia replied. "That's right. You're such a smart little girl," Fred said with a smile. "You feeling okay, Mama?" Nicole asked, looking cute in her red sleep shirt and Santa hat. "Yeah," Anne-Marie said with a smile, though she wasn't entirely truthful. Danny felt a mix of emotions as he watched his daughter cheerily play with the baby and admire all the gifts Cindy had gotten. He loved his daughter and grandson, but he couldn't explain the frustration building inside him. And there was that locket, the one from her old boyfriend. Danny forced a smile when his daughter thanked him for the new clothes. Since Cindy came back with their daughter, that old guy hadn't called again. Bobby jumped up with excitement when he saw the Sony PlayStation 2. Finding it had been a challenge. He'd searched stores for miles and even traveled to New Orleans just to get one. Chris smiled as he looked at the funny Christmas card Sandra had sent him. It showed Sandra with Jimmy and their kids, along with their 2 dogs in front of their Christmas tree. "Perfect," he said, and set it down. Sweet William's card wished him a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and he had even signed it with love. It takes a real man to do that, Chris thought, smiling. He locked his apartment and took his suitcase to the waiting cab. "Where to?" the cab driver asked as they headed toward Lafayette Airport. "Las Vegas," Chris replied. Oh, spending Christmas with family? The cab driver asked, only half interested. No, thank goodness, no family, Chris said with a tight smile. She watched the video again, letting her tears flow. Sophia sat nearby, reading Sleeping Beauty to her nephew. Fred had edited the video, adding soft piano music that gently filled the quiet moments. He had chosen a different piece for each video he created. And they lived happily ever after, Sophia signed as she shut the book with a soft thump. One more, Freddie asked, signing to his Aunt Sophia. Time to sleep, she signed back firmly. Yes, ma'am, Miss Bossy, Anne-Marie said with a smile as the video screen faded to black. Pilot, Sandra said when she answered the phone. Miss Sandra, this is Nicole, Nicole said, her voice shaking. Nicole, what's wrong? Sandra asked, filled with concern. My mama's in the hospital. Dr. Nicole began to cry, her sobs loud and heart-wrenching. Chris raised an eyebrow when Sandra told him about the call. So, when are you going to see her? Sweet William asked as they jogged along the highway. Not going, Chris replied, keeping up with Sweet William's fast pace. What? Are you serious? Sweet William stammered. Yep, Chris said. We're not even married. Why should I visit her? He noticed Sweet William had fallen behind and turned back. Sweet William was standing several yards away looking shocked. Chris ran back to him. I really don't understand you, Sweet William exclaimed, frustrated. I know she hurt you, but come on, she's not well. And, Chris said, I'm sorry about it, but I don't see the point. Honestly, I hope we outlive you, Sweet William said as he turned to head back to the office. That's all I'll say. You better hope we do, so at least 2 people will come to your funeral. She was not in pain, just very tired. Her fingers held onto the rosary she had as a child. Even though she couldn't feel it, it brought her some peace. Hi, Chris said softly. Chris? She whispered, surprised. I heard you're not doing well, he said, looking into her brown eyes. I'm dying, she said plainly. I know, he replied. I'm sorry. Chris? She asked. Yes, Anne-Marie? He replied. I know I shouldn't ask this, but, she said slowly, struggling. Anything, he assured her. Please, forgive me, she pleaded. I do, he said. I've forgiven you, and she smiled with relief. She felt his lips brush against hers and felt a moment of happiness. Thank you, Chris, she said. I need you to forgive me too, he said quietly. I haven't been the best. I'm sorry too, Anne-Marie whispered. If you haven't been great, it's partly my fault. Are we good? He asked, and she nodded. Nicole, she said suddenly with urgency. Please help our daughter. She's changed. Promise me you'll take care of her. I promise, he replied. They chatted for a little while longer until she drifted off to sleep, completely worn out. He gently touched her face and then stepped out of her room. She heard soft piano music playing and imagined her daughter, her lovely, brave daughter, singing Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. Do you think she can hear that? Nicole tried to hold back her tears as she looked down at her mother. I think so, Fred replied, tenderly taking his mother-in-law's hand. Buddy had not changed at all since high school. He was still immature, self-centered, and a bit arrogant. These were the reasons she had avoided going to the senior prom with him, and why there had never been a second date. But her father liked Buddy, and he seemed to like Christopher Michael, even if he insisted on calling him Chris or Chrissy. It's Christopher Michael, she reminded him again as Buddy showed them around the Baylor Lake cabin his family owned. She smiled, looking at the lake. Spring was her favorite time of the year, and the scenery was beautiful. Her smile revealed the small improvements her father had made for her. And we can dive right off the deck, Buddy said, leaning over the railing to show her how it extended over the water. Oh, I really don't think I want to wear a swimsuit, Alicia replied quickly. Ah, afraid people will judge you? Buddy joked. No, Alicia responded, glaring at him. She felt fine about her body. She had lost most of the weight she had gained while having Christopher Michael, but it was the many tattoos she still had that made her hesitant to wear a swimsuit. Or we could swim without suits, Buddy suggested with a grin. Uh-huh, Alicia said, rolling her eyes. Whatever. She prepared a simple lunch, made them both a green salad, and brought it to the table. Buddy sat back and waited for her to serve the meal without offering to help. Then he left his plate on the table for her to clean up. Whew, he remarked when Christopher Michael needed a diaper change. Alicia waited for a moment to see if Buddy would help change the boy's diaper. Chris had never complained about changing the boy, even when it was a messy situation. Chris had always been eager to assist her, but her father didn't like Chris. He had not liked Tony, who had left her. He hadn't liked Jimbo, who had used her and moved on. Maybe her father was right. Maybe Buddy was someone who could support her. They sat on the deck and watched the sun as it set, creating beautiful colors in the sky. "Careful," she whispered when he reached to touch her. "I'm feeding the baby." She responded to his touch and gave him a kiss. "What's the deal?" he said when she moved his hand away. "It's not like you've never been with someone before." "That doesn't mean I'm ready for everything," she replied firmly. He felt surprised when he saw Anne-Marie lying in her hospital bed. The last time he saw her, she was young and full of energy, looking a bit proud as she held onto Tom Sampo's arm. Chris made himself a drink and stepped out onto his back porch to watch the sunset. The wicker chairs were more comfortable than they appeared, so he sat down and enjoyed his gin and vermouth. Her face looked tired, with skin so thin it seemed like it could tear. "Sweet William, you were right," he said to himself. She had asked for his forgiveness, and he realized he did forgive her. She had wanted him to help Nicole and Fred. She told him that Fred was a good man who just needed some support, especially with very little money coming in and a family to take care of, including 2 kids and another on the way, along with a sick mother-in-law. But Fred never complained or worried those around him. "He's a great teacher," Anne-Marie had said weakly. "Sophia? She's only 3 and she can read. She understands what she reads." "Sounds like a bright little girl," Chris smiled. "Oh God, Chris, you have no idea," Anne-Marie smiled back. A girl from the house behind him stepped out onto her deck, acting like she didn't see him. Chris watched as she applied sunscreen in a playful way before changing her top. Then she laid down, the fence blocking his view. He shook his head and smiled at her playful nature. He knew she wasn't trying to get his attention. She was simply enjoying herself. Later, he expected she would walk around her room with the curtains open, lights on. "Some people are just like that," he said, standing up as his drink was empty. "So?" Danny asked when Alicia and Christopher Michael entered the house. "How was it?" Cindy poked her husband gently. "It was fine," Alicia replied with a shrug. "His parents have a nice place by the lake." "Come on," Cindy whispered to Danny. "What?" "I just asked how my daughter's date was," Danny said. "Uh-huh," Cindy replied, not believing him. Father Dave held the woman's hand kindly, preparing to give her the last rites. "Go in peace, my child," he said to Anne-Marie. He stepped into the hospital hallway and smiled at Nicole, Freddie, and Sophia. "Hi," he signed to Sophia. "Hi, Father Dave," she replied with a smile. "Okay, that's all I know in sign language," he joked, signing "I love you" to her. "That's plenty," Nicole said. "More than most people know." "See you all this Sunday?" he asked. "We should, unless," Nicole replied. Chris walked upstairs to his bedroom and looked out the window. The girl was walking around in her bedroom, a towel casually wrapped around her body. Now and then she would lift the edge of it, giving him a brief view of her. He had purchased the house right after New Year's. When he came back from Las Vegas and entered his apartment, he felt a wave of loneliness. On January 2nd, he called a real estate agency and asked to look for houses in Bender or DeGard. They found a house on January 4th, and he made an offer immediately. Sandra and Sweet William helped him choose the furniture, and he realized they had a better sense of style than he did. The girl was now putting lotion on her legs while sitting on the edge of her bed. This position allowed him to catch glimpses of her as she worked. "Uh-huh," Chris smiled as the girl looked toward his room. "Like I'm going to return the favor?" It was a 4-bedroom house, and both Sweet William and Sandra asked him why he needed such a big place. He didn't really have an answer. The previous owners must have had children because there was an almost new swing set in the backyard. That swing set had made Chris decide to buy the house. "I have a grandson," he finally told Sandra. "You never know. Nicole might need me to babysit one night. Freddie will have a swing set to play on, and his own room for naps." "Uh-huh," Sandra replied, and chose a racing car bed along with a chest of drawers for the child's room. "That is cute," Chris smiled, She could hear the music from the piano and saw her lovely little girl sign, "And they lived happily ever after." All her exhaustion faded away, replaced by a wonderful sense of calm. The brightest light she had ever seen surrounded her, but it didn't hurt her eyes. "God," she asked in awe. Nicole cried out in despair as the monitor showed a flat line. "Hello?" Chris mumbled sleepily as he answered his phone. "Daddy?" Nicole's voice came through. Cindy was polite as she sat on the deck of the lake cabin with Danny, Alicia, Bobby, Christopher Michael, and Buddy with his parents. She felt uneasy around the Webbs and often wondered why Danny liked them. "Yeah, Jack and I argue about religion," Susan laughed, having had a few drinks. "He thinks he's right, and I don't." Jack made Alicia uncomfortable. He seemed to stare at her the whole time. When Christopher Michael needed to eat, Alicia kindly but firmly closed the bedroom door to take care of her baby. If Buddy noticed his father's behavior, he said nothing. There were moments when Jack acted inappropriately, even with Alicia's parents and cousin nearby. Chris nodded in agreement as Sweet William sat beside him. "Man, I didn't realize how much she was struggling," Sweet William whispered. Chris had to agree. In the 2 months since he had seen her in the hospital, she had not been well. She had lost a lot of weight and her face looked pale. He noticed she was wearing a lot of makeup, but there was only so much that could be done. He glanced at his daughter and felt proud. She was handling the service with calmness and grace, so different from the girl she had been just 4 years ago. "Dad?" she asked as she walked down the aisle to him. "Will you be one of the pallbearers, please?" "I would be honored," Chris said, and she smiled softly. "Hi, Mr. William," she said, looking past her dad at the tall man. "I need one more pallbearer." "It would be my honor. I always cared for your mother," Sweet William replied. "Good. Then you all need to come sit up here," Nicole said, pointing to a pew near the casket where Fred and 3 other men were already sitting. "I need to talk with you," Chris said quietly to Fred as they stood in the condo where Anne Marie had lived during her last year. They stepped outside into the warm, humid air, speaking softly. Nicole's eyes widened in surprise when Fred walked into the living room. "Did you know that your mother left a life insurance policy worth $250,000? He whispered to his wife. "She did what?" Nicole asked, unable to believe her ears. "Yeah, and she told your dad she wanted the money to fund my college?" Fred said. "She said it had to go to my college or we couldn't get it." Nicole felt a mix of emotions. She was torn between laughing at Fred's surprise and feeling joyful. She simply smiled and squeezed his hand. "Does that mean I'm going to be married to a teacher?" she asked. "I guess so," he replied, still amazed by their luck. "Good. I'm tired of the smell of Taco Bell on you," Nicole said with a smile as another person offered their condolences. "Hello?" Chris answered his phone. "Thank you, Daddy," Nicole said. "For what?" Chris pretended not to know. "You know what for," Nicole replied playfully. "Your mother asked me to help him, but she knew he wouldn't accept my help easily," Chris said honestly. "You know he wants to go to Notre Dame, right?" Nicole said. Chris felt a familiar chill wash over him. Just when he thought he could reconnect with his daughter, complications were threatening that again. "Come on, Chris, be mature," he chided himself. "Well, at least he's Catholic," Chris said out loud. Buddy was a bit slow, but he was starting to see things the way Alicia did. He finally realized that when he acted inappropriately, it showed everyone that he didn't respect her. "Would you like it if I kept calling you names like stupid or something worse?" Alicia asked. "No, not really," he replied. "Well, that's kind of what you're doing when you act like that in public," Alicia explained. But inside, he was just as rude and pushy as always. She wondered why her dad liked Buddy so much and why he wanted her to date such a bold young man. Danny frowned. Someone had been messing with the items on his desk again. The picture of Alicia and Christopher Michael was facing him once more. He kept trying to turn it away, but someone kept putting it back. He took the frame off his desk and dropped it into a drawer. After thinking for a moment, he opened the drawer again. He took the back off the frame, removed the photograph, and searched around until he found an envelope. He wrote an address on it and smiled as he stamped it. "Welcome to Notre Dame," the dean said as he greeted Fred Dumas. "Lafayette, huh? I was just there 3 weeks ago. We don't have any food like that here, that's for sure." "You should have told me you were in town," Fred said. I would have taken you to Miss Helen's for some great food. Oh, by the way, you need to call Mrs. Bonham, the dean said, handing Fred a business card. Fred looked at the card, then back at the dean. Why? Fred finally asked. I think she has the keys for your house, the dean smiled. Did my dad buy us a house? Fred asked as the realtor pointed out the fenced backyard. I guess so, Nicole agreed. She bit her lip as the realtor watched Sophia, who was signaling that she needed to go to the bathroom. Get used to it, kid, she thought. Some people just don't understand. Your mom and I had a nice talk before she passed, Chris said when Nicole called him. She asked me to look after you and Sophia. She said, take care of my babies, please. And I couldn't refuse her, especially not then. Well, it's beautiful, Nicole said sincerely. And I made sure to ask for a fenced backyard, somewhere safe for Sophia and Freddie to play. It has that, Nicole said. And there's a school right down the street. The woman said it's a really nice one. That's great, Chris said, then paused. There was a long silence. Well, I love you, Chris said. Call me sometimes, okay? He closed his phone and picked up the photograph again. Alicia looked so lovely. He loved how the red blouse highlighted her skin, and Christopher Michael had such bright red hair and a big, friendly smile. The photographer arranged the scene with Alicia sitting on the floor, her right hand supporting her while her left hand rested on Christopher Michael, helping him stay upright. Such a beautiful, he whispered. A letter had been sent to the apartment where he used to live, but the mail carrier delivered it to his office instead. He appreciated the extra effort and ignored the man's reluctance as he slipped him a $20 bill. Rachel, or Rochelle, walked past an upstairs window, undressed. Chris shook his head at the boldness. He wondered if her mother was aware of what was happening just above her. He had briefly spoken with the girl's mother while trimming a climbing rose by the back fence. The very large woman approached him and seemed out of breath by the time she reached the fence. Chris looked down at her from the ladder he was on. He noticed Rachel's younger sister, Tanisha, trying to stay hidden. Being polite was important, as they were neighbors. He pushed back any discomfort he felt at her appearance. Chris learned that Rachel, or Rochelle, was a student at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, studying without any clear goals for her future. In contrast, Tanisha worked as a stock clerk at Early's grocery store. Well, my son-in-law is a student at Notre Dame, he said proudly. He's majoring in education. My daughter is excited to become a grandmother soon. I already have one grandson and another on the way. Fred thinks it's a boy. Nicole thinks it's a girl. Are you married? Claire asked directly. Chris replied. Yes, they're married. No, are you married? Claire clarified. Me? Chris said, taken aback. No, He searched his thoughts quickly. Engaged, he finally said. Oh, Claire responded, and then turned to walk back to her house with Tanisha following quietly. Goodness, Chris thought, watching them go. He went into the living room, found the box of frames that Sandra had left for him, and placed the photograph inside. Tomorrow, he would take it to the office for Sandra to add alongside the one photo he had of Christopher Michael. She would go on about how lovely the boy was, and he would agree. Alicia felt a rush of heat as she shared the story of her tattoos with Buddy. She turned to see his flushed expression. His jeans looked a bit tight, and she felt uneasy. Instead of showing disgust or sympathy or anger at her story, he seemed intrigued. So, was that the only time you were with a girl? He asked, almost breathless. Yes, she replied sharply, feeling frustrated. It's not like I was with her. She pushed herself on me. She wanted to strike him. There was a sudden mark on the front of his jeans. You know what to do, Daddy, Nicole cried and chuckled as the contractions began. And here's Johnny, Fred said as he pulled on his blue jeans. It's Anne-Marie, and you know it, Nicole shouted, laughing. Jonathan Michael Dumas, Fred said as he slipped on his sweatshirt. Quiet and go wake the kids. Miss Evelyn is waiting for them, Nicole said, and groaned as another contraction came. She didn't even have a key. Daddy said this was her house, that it was Christopher Michael's house, but she didn't have a key, couldn't come and go as she wished. They felt trapped here. She took the baby, now walking on wobbly legs, into the backyard, making sure the door was unlocked before it closed. In early autumn, leaves lay on the ground, crunching under her feet. Christopher Michael laughed and gurgled as he stumbled and fell into the thick leaves. He was such a cheerful baby. He was the true joy of her life. The 11-month-old found a large ball and kicked it, tumbling over with the effort. Laughter filled the air. Her cell phone rang and she pulled it out to see the name. Buddy. Again. Since last night, when she insisted he take her home, he'd been calling and leaving messages. She had listened to his apologies, but it was obvious he didn't really understand what he was sorry for, nor why she was so upset. "Here's Johnny," Fred said once more. "Be quiet," Nicole said and kissed him while holding the baby boy. "Did you call your dad yet?" he asked. "Uh-huh," Nicole replied, smiling. "I think he was really emotional when he hung up." "That's right," Chris said as he walked into the lobby and tossed a bubblegum cigar at Sandra. "That's right. I'm a grandfather. Jonathan Michael Dumas, born at 3 o'clock this morning." Sandra put her finger to her lips to hush him and pointed to the couch in the lobby. He glanced over and saw Alicia, sound asleep, her head tilted back. At her feet was a stroller, Christopher Michael strapped in. The boy was just waking up and looked up at Chris, smiling his 7-toothed grin. "Hey, Christopher Michael," he said quietly, crinkling his nose slightly. The boy needed changing. He unhooked the diaper bag from the back of the stroller and took it and the boy into the bathroom. "Whew, did you eat that?" He chuckled as he cleaned the boy up. Christopher Michael laughed happily as Chris changed his diaper. "Come on, son, let's see if Mommy is awake," Chris said, leaving the bathroom. Alicia was waiting in the office and hugged him tightly when he walked in, still holding Christopher Michael. "Hey," he said softly, holding her close and swaying gently. "Hey," she replied. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I went down to the apartment, but the man in number 2 said you moved and didn't know where. I was worried you might be gone for good, so I walked back here. Miss Sandra arrived just as I got here. I told her who I was, and she recognized me because I had Christopher Michael. She let me in and said you would come soon. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, Miss Sandra told me you took him to change his diaper," Alicia said, talking quickly. "You walked all the way from the apartment?" Chris asked, kissing the top of her head. "First, I walked from my mom and dad's to the apartment. I couldn't take it anymore," Alicia admitted. She pulled back to look into his eyes. "Chris, I know you might not really love me," she said sadly. "But I am okay with that if you want us." "Don't really. Are you joking? I love you more than I can express, more than words can say, but," Chris said, surprised. "You do?" Alicia asked, barely able to believe it. "When I lost you, my happiness disappeared," Chris replied. "You can ask Sandra. I've just been moping around without a smile on my face." "Sandra, I need to borrow your car," Chris said as he rushed out of his office. "Of course," she said, handing him the keys to the car he had given her as a Christmas present. "And I'm taking the rest of the day off," he added. "Not expecting to see you until Monday," she replied. "Oh," Chris said, realizing something. "And look, there's a swing set. I got that in case you ever brought Christopher Michael here," Chris said excitedly, showing her the backyard. "And you've got to see his room. It has—" "I'd rather see your room," Alicia said with a joyful laugh. "By the way, you have a beautiful smile," he said and kissed her again. "Yeah, you like my new teeth?" she asked, laughing. "They're beautiful," he replied and kissed her again. "Come on, the stairs are right over here." She liked ska music, but she didn't think it was something she loved enough to get a ska tattoo on her back. And the older man had a great shape for his age. "Oh no!" Alicia shouted. "Oh no, sweetie!" Chris laughed. He had just changed the sheets the day before, but it looked like he might need to do it again. The bed was wet with several spots, as if he and Alicia were trying to make up for lost time. Sophia asked if the man was her brother, and Nicole said it was her nephew. "Want brother," Sophia said. "Okay, brother," Nicole replied. "Good," Sophia smiled. "Here, Johnny." "Fred," Nicole shouted. "Come on, teaching her things like that." "Next will be Anne-Marie," Fred said, giving his wife a kiss. "Uh-huh. Think I'm ever going to let you near me again?" Nicole said with a pout. "Teaching her, here's Johnny?" Chris searched through the dresser and found what he was looking for. Alicia smiled when he came closer, but frowned a bit when he knelt next to her by the bed. "I wish I could make this really special, like fly you to Paris or something, but I'm worried if I wait too long, I might miss my chance. Alicia, will you marry me?" His mother's ring fit her perfectly, and she kept admiring it. For the first time, he noticed how small the diamond was. "I'll get you a better ring tomorrow," he promised. "Oh, no, you won't," she said firmly. "Nothing else would be as perfect as this. This is my ring." Cindy was really happy and relieved to hear about Alicia and Chris's engagement. Danny wasn't as excited until Chris jokingly asked him, "So do I call you Dad now?" "Danny will be fine," Danny said with a half smile. "Behind my back you can call me whatever, but to my face I prefer Chris," Chris said, and they shook hands. "Oh, hey," Danny said when he saw Alicia and Cindy carrying boxes out to the car. "I'm not spending another night without her," Chris said firmly. "Oh, all right, whatever. She's an adult now," Danny grumbled. They were in the garage making orange sherbet as Alicia said the machine was too loud for the house. Christopher Michael was so excited about ice cream for dessert that he made up a song and danced around while his dad mixed the ingredients. "You're a handful, you know that?" Chris laughed as the kid danced around. He looked up as a car pulled into their driveway and smiled when he saw the Fighting Irish license plate. Christopher Michael kept dancing, not minding if anyone was watching. "I gave you that!" Nicole shouted. "For Father's Day, I gave you that ice cream maker. I was 12, and wow, I can't believe you still have that thing." "Hi, how are you?" Chris said with a big smile as he hugged his daughter and kissed her on the forehead. "When did you all get into town? How long are you staying? Where are my grandsons?" "Whoa, who's that?" Christopher Michael said in surprise as Sophia got out of the car. "That's Sophia, right?" Chris asked. "Come here and meet your sister, Nicole." "Hi, Sophia," Christopher Michael said, reaching out his hand. "I'm Christopher Michael Dumas." Sophia stared at him and then looked at Nicole. "Name Christopher Michael," Nicole signed. "Shake hands." Sophia looked back and shook Christopher Michael's hand but tried to pull away. Christopher Michael held on tight. "Come on inside, you have to see my room," he said excitedly, trying to guide her toward the door leading into the house. "Naole!" Sophia shouted, looking for Nicole. "Son," Chris said gently, "she can't hear you, she's deaf. You're speaking really fast and she doesn't understand." "She's what?" Christopher Michael asked, puzzled. "She's deaf," Nicole explained. "That means she can't hear." "What?" Christopher Michael asked. "Why can't she hear?" "Her ears don't work," Chris replied. "Then fix them, Daddy," Christopher Michael insisted. He turned to Sophia, who was calming down a bit. "My dad can fix anything. You should see his motorcycles. He built them himself. He even lets me ride them. Come on, I'll show you." "I don't think he gets it," Nicole said sweetly to Sophia. "But where are Freddie and Johnny?" Chris asked. "Fred took them fishing," Nicole laughed as she led them toward the house. "That means I'll have 3 sunburned men waiting for me when I get home." Alicia smiled as the 4 of them entered the house. Cynthia stood shyly behind her mother. "Hi, Chris. I hope you don't mind, but I invited your daughter over for lunch," Alicia said with a friendly smile. "I'm Alicia. We talked on the phone yesterday." "Naole!" Sophia called out as Christopher Michael tried to pull her toward the stairs. "Son, no!" Chris said firmly. "If you want to play with your toys, you need to bring them down here." By the time Alicia took the lasagna out of the oven, Christopher Michael began to realize that Sophia couldn't hear him. Sophia also started to see that the upbeat boy was friendly and not a danger to her. They were playing checkers when Alicia said it was time for lunch. "And for dessert, we're having orange sherbet. My dad makes the best orange sherbet in the world," Christopher Michael said happily as they sat down in the dining room. "Orange ice cream," Nicole signed, and Sophia's eyes lit up. "We're going to need more high chairs," Alicia chuckled as she placed 3-year-old Cynthia in one. "What?" Nicole asked, confused. "Christopher Michael is okay right there, right?" "I'm just trying to give your dad a little hint," Alicia smiled. "Like leaving the box on the bathroom counter didn't make it clear?" Chris joked lightly. They said a quick prayer before digging in eagerly. Sophia looked up and saw Christopher Michael staring at her. She made a silly face, and he smiled and blew her a kiss across the table. She gasped and turned to Nicole with a look of surprise. "He's silly," she signed to her sister. "No, he likes you," Nicole replied. True to her guess, Fred, Freddie, and Johnny were all sunburned and covered in bug bites when she and Sophia got back to the apartment they were renting. "Sophia has a boyfriend," Nicole said with a grin as Fred finished telling her about their fun day out in the basin. "Oh, no, she doesn't," he said, overly protective of his little girl. "Calm down, Dad," Nicole said. "She's almost 8. It's bound to happen." "One more," Freddie begged as Sophia finished reading The Princess and the Frog to him and Johnny. Sophia didn't reply. She was focused on the drawing of the handsome prince who looked nothing like Christopher Michael. "One more," Johnny signed, tapping his bed to get her attention. "Cinderella," Freddie demanded. Sophia smiled. Cinderella had long blonde hair just like hers. "Mom," Christopher Michael said seriously, "I just want you to know, even though I love you, I care about someone else." "You mean Sophia?" she asked as she tucked him into bed. "Yes," he replied earnestly. "But what about Patty?" Alicia asked. "I thought you liked her." No, she's nice and all, but Mom, you don't get it. When Sophia got out of the car, it felt like there were hearts all around her," Christopher Michael said dramatically. She laughed when she shared the story. Chris smiled and held her tight. "You're laughing, but I was there when she got out of the car. That boy was taken with her right away," Chris said. He looked up when he heard a knock at the door. "What do you want, buddy?" he asked Christopher Michael playfully. "We need to invite Sophia to my birthday party, remember?" "It's in 15 days, Christopher Michael said. "I thought you were in bed," Alicia replied firmly. "I was, but I realized, oh my God, she thinks I'm a kid. She doesn't know I'm almost 5, Christopher Michael explained. "Okay, I already told Nicole about it, but I'll send an invitation tomorrow," Alicia promised. "That long?" Christopher Michael asked, disappointed. "Mail doesn't run at night, Christopher Michael," Chris said. "Now come on, it's time for you to sleep." "When you saw Mommy, did you see them too?" Christopher Michael asked his father. "The hearts?" "Yeah, and you know what?" Chris said as he tucked the blanket around the small child. "What?" Christopher Michael wondered. "I still do. I see all these hearts just floating around her," Chris admitted. "Oh my gosh," Nicole laughed. "I just remembered, his birthday is next Saturday." "Whose?" Fred asked, looking up from his computer. "And you know whose birthday is next Sunday, right?" Nicole continued, glancing at the invitation. Christopher Michael was polite to the other guests in the busy pizza place on Johnson Street. Most were from his pre-kindergarten class at St. Richard's, but he kept watching the front door eagerly. "Woohoo, there she is!" he shouted when Sophia, Nicole, Freddie, and Johnny arrived, with Fred coming in last. "She's learning to read lips. It's hard for her since she's never heard words before," Nicole told Alicia while they observed the kids. "Fred's teaching her. He's the best at it, but finding work has been tough. I was really glad to finish school in just 3 years," Fred shared with Chris and another dad who had come to the party. "I thought I'd get a jump on job hunting, and Nicole wanted to come back home where people don't mispronounce our last name." "And?" Chris asked, smiling as Christopher Michael moved aside for Sophia to take her turn at the video game. "Not as easy as I thought," Fred admitted. "Maybe in Lafayette," Chris agreed. "You should try St. Thomas Aquinas. It's just down the street from us." "Okay, I will," Fred promised. "Happy birthday to you," they sang, and Christopher Michael smiled as Sophia, sitting next to him, signed along with the song. "Hey, Christopher Michael, could you take your eyes off her for a second and make a wish?" Alicia nudged the boy gently. "Uh-huh," he mumbled, and quickly blew out the candles. "Did you even make a wish?" she teased. "Uh-huh," he replied. "Give her the big piece, the one with the rose on it." "Wow, it must be love if he's giving her the piece with the rose," Alicia giggled at Nicole. "This is Brother Dominic," a gruff voice said. "Hey, Dominic," Chris replied. "I'll get straight to the point. My son-in-law needs a job." "That's what I appreciate about you," Brother Dominic said. "No greetings or small talk, just, my son-in-law needs a job." "All right, fine. I see you like to keep things short when you need something, but I'll go along with it," Chris smiled. "Hi, Dominic. How are you? How are things going? My son-in-law needs a job." "Now that's better, cousin," Brother Dominic chuckled. "Send him in." "Thank you, cousin," Chris replied sincerely. "Oh, great. Bring them to me all hyped up on treats," Cindy joked as Chris and Alicia dropped off Christopher Michael and Cynthia. "Uh-huh," Chris smiled. "And to make sure we stop by for some espressos, they should be full of energy. Grandma." "Stop it," Cindy laughed. "Be careful tonight. You know I worry about you guys on those motorcycles." "Thanks, Mom," Alicia said as she placed the diaper bag on the couch. "Cynthia's not quite ready for potty training yet. I let her wear diapers while she sleeps, just in case." "Don't worry, I can handle a little girl," Cindy smiled. And she has long blonde hair and a beautiful smile, Christopher Michael told his grandfather as he led him down the hall. Hey! Chris smiled as his father-in-law entered the room, being guided by Christopher Michael. Did you hear this boy has a girlfriend? Danny asked, serious. And she's really pretty, Alicia added. Definitely, Christopher Michael agreed, nodding seriously. Chris shook his head as Alicia used the electric starter on her motorcycle instead of kick-starting it. She grinned at him when it took him 3 tries to start his bike and blew him a kiss before putting down her helmet's visor. When April had called to tell him about Jimbo's passing, he was unsure how to tell Alicia. We need to go to the funeral, Alicia finally said. Are you all right with that? He asked. Chris, that was a long time ago, she replied softly. I don't have the tattoos anymore. Except, he started and she smiled. Except for that, she said. And that's just for you. The word was still marked on her skin. Mr. Dumas, I am yours, she told Chris. And don't forget it. They sped off toward the funeral home in Breaux Bridge, soon joining about 40 other motorcycles that revved and roared along. April looked older now, weary. She smiled when she saw Chris, but turned pale when she noticed Alicia. She pulled her 6-year-old daughter, Jamie, close. Hi, April, Alicia said gently. I'm really sorry for your loss. Thank you, April replied, struggling to find her words. He looks good, Chris said. Yeah, just lying around, which was about the only thing he was good at, April agreed, and they all shared a quiet laugh. Oh, hey, this is Jamie, Jimbo's daughter, April finally introduced. Jamie, this is Chris and Alicia. They were friends of your dad. Hello, Chris said with a smile as he shook hands with the girl. I have a son who is about your age, Alicia added cheerfully. He's 5. How old are you? I'm 6.5, Jamie replied with a hint of pride. How could this woman think she and a 5-year-old were the same? Boys were silly anyway. Chris glanced into April's eyes and noticed something there. This girl with brown hair and brown eyes didn't seem to be Jimbo's daughter. He shrugged, and that look vanished. April gave a small nod to show her appreciation. The funeral was quick, and the bikers drove behind the hearse to the cemetery. A minister said a few final words, and afterwards, Chris and Alicia left. You never told me you and April were close, Alicia said once they were home. Chris began but hesitated. Don't lie to me, Michael Christopher Dumas, Alicia said, a flash of anger in her voice. I've never lied to you. Don't you dare lie to me. That was 7 years ago, before I even knew you, Chris replied, feeling frustrated. How did you find out? Jamie, Alicia shouted, her anger rising. She looks just like Nicole. She pushed him away, her eyes filled with fire. So what happened? She demanded, the words clenched between her teeth. Was it a relationship? Did you both care for her like that? No, Chris shouted back. It wasn't like that at all. Then tell me what it was like, she snapped, pushing him again. I bought the motorcycle from Jimbo. April and I worked on it together, then the night we finished, we went back to my place, Chris explained. Did you care for each other? Alicia asked with a bitter tone. Honestly, it wasn't love, Chris said. It was just a casual thing. Show me, Alicia insisted. What do you mean? Chris replied, confused. Show me, Alicia yelled. I want to understand the difference. What's the difference between making love and just being together? She pushed him again. All right, you asked for it, he replied, lifting her and playfully tossing her onto the bed. Just do it, he said, trying to be bold. He was struggling to feel excited. Being rough with her was not what he wanted, and it upset him. She had always enjoyed being close, but today felt different for him. Please, just do it, he urged, holding her close. She gasped a bit when he turned her position, and they shared a kiss. Did you feel that? She asked, surprised as he moved closer. She was feeling a bit different, but she didn't care as she held onto him tightly. That's enough, she breathed after feeling a rush of emotions. But we can keep going, he insisted, shifting their positions. Oh no! Please don't do that, she said, concerned but still letting him in. They moved together, both feeling a mix of pleasure. And then, he began when she came back from the bathroom. No! She yelped as he gently pulled her back onto the bed. They shared a deep kiss, feeling connected again. Then she left and I didn't see her again until now, he said, resting beside her. After everything, who could blame her? she commented. That was a lot. You asked, he replied. Uh-huh, she said, then leaned in closer. She kissed him softly, and he began to feel closer again. Think you can make me feel like that again? She teased. Did I tell you to stop? He replied playfully. Hey, how's it going? He asked, as Nicole, Sophia, Freddie, and Johnny walked into his office. Pretty good. Fred's enjoying his trip to St. Thomas right now. Did you know you and Brother Dominic are cousins? Nicole said. Yes, I did, he answered. And you helped him get that job, didn't you? Nicole asked, curious about her father's role in Fred's luck. No, I just set up the interview. He earned the job himself, he said firmly. Thanks, Dad, Nicole replied. Now, where are my grandchildren going to school? He asked. Well, we're still in Lafayette Parish, Nicole said. No, not unless you're sending them to Fatima, he replied confidently. Dad, we can't afford, Nicole started to say. How about St. Richard's? He suggested. Isn't that close to St. Thomas's? Nicole asked. Yeah, let me make a call, he said, dialing a number. Dad, wait, Nicole said. Sophia isn't slow or anything, but she struggles in regular schools, Nicole explained. What if we got her some interpreters? He suggested. Both UL and ULD offer classes in American Sign Language. We can talk to the teachers. Dad? She asked. You would really do that? I mean, she's not your daughter. No, she's not my daughter, but she is your sister, Chris replied, talking on the phone for a moment, and then he smiled. Okay. The administrator is expecting you, Sophia, and Freddie at 9:30 tomorrow morning, he said. You all will love St. Richard's. Christopher Michael goes there. He started pre-K there and is now going to kindergarten this year and is really excited about it. That kid is excited about everything, Nicole chuckled. Yeah, he sure is, Chris agreed. Hey, get all those kids out of here, Sweet William said as he walked in. Mr. William, Nicole said cheerfully as she hugged the big man. Are you a giant? Freddie asked, staring up in amazement at him. Nicole sat with the paperwork, trying to smile supportively at Sophia. Sophia had difficulty at her last school and had given up. Because of this, instead of moving up to the 3rd grade, she would have to repeat the 2nd grade. Nicole glanced around as a tired-looking woman exited the administrator's office. The woman wore a short-sleeve blouse and her arms were covered in tattoos. She was pulling along a pretty girl. Nicole thought they both seemed out of place. Mrs. Dumas, the older woman called out, and Nicole stood up with Freddie and Sophia following her. Are you the administrator? Nicole asked, forcing a smile. Oh, no, ma'am, I'm Mrs. Dumas's assistant, the woman replied with a smile. Mrs. Dumas will see you now. At least we have the same last name, Nicole thought, feeling a little better. Mrs. Dumas? Alicia asked with a big smile. Hi, I'm Mrs. Dumas, the administrator for St. Richard's. Mama, why are you crying? Jamie asked her mother. Because, honey, I'm happy, April said, her voice shaky. You're going to get a really good education, and that makes me happy. At first, April was surprised when she received the information packet from St. Richard's. She hadn't planned to enroll Jamie in the school. Jimbo had left them without insurance and no money. They had already sold the motorcycles to cover many bills. Anything else of value had been sold when Jimbo got sick. When Mrs. Dumas followed up with a phone call, April decided to come in for an interview. The older woman had welcomed her and Jamie into the office, and April felt uneasy when Alicia turned around from the computer and smiled. The smile faded when April instinctively pulled Jamie behind her, her eyes connected with April's. I would never hurt you or your daughter, she softly told April. Please, take a seat. We want Jamie to go to St. Richard's, Alicia said as April and Jamie sat on the wooden chairs in front of Alicia's desk. We can't afford that, April replied. No, there's someone who will pay for everything until she finishes college, Alicia explained, making it clear to April who this person was. Plus, there will be $200 a month for clothes and school things. Are you serious? April said, then blushed, remembering where she was. Please, Alicia said. It would mean a lot to Chris and me. When Chris and I got married, he encouraged me to finish college. I only had 3 more semesters left, Alicia told Nicole, who was still amused by her father's and stepmother's little trick. I earned my degree in early childhood education with a minor in business. Sister Andrea retired, and brother Dominic, Chris's cousin, asked me if I wanted a job at church. Chris and I don't need the money, but I wanted to do something other than just stay at home, so... And when Fred and I moved back to Lafayette, Nicole chimed in happily. We wanted you to be part of the St. Richard's family, Alicia smiled. He won't say it, but all he wants is to care for you and his grandchildren. Hey, is your dad home? Sweet William asked Christopher Michael when he opened the door. Yeah, Mr. Sweet, come on in, Christopher Michael replied, opening the door wide. Hey, Chris said, surprised when Sweet William walked in. Hope I'm not interrupting anything, Sweet William said. No, just watching the news. Alicia's cooking. Are you staying for dinner? Chris asked. No, I have plans, but I wanted to talk to you, just us, Sweet William said, nodding toward the back porch. Sure, Alicia, Chris called out. Yeah, she replied. Sweet William and I will be out on the back porch, Chris said. Okay, Alicia responded. Is he staying for dinner? No, he says your cooking gives him an upset stomach, Chris joked. I did not say that, Sweet William protested. That's fine, I might just burn his food, Alicia laughed. Don't you always? Chris teased as he opened the door to the porch. Do you remember that girl, Trish? The one from the exercise class? Sweet William asked as they sat on the stone bench. Trish Miller? Yeah, what happened with her? You two seemed really close, then suddenly. Chris replied. Yeah, she got scared, she said. Sweet William shrugged. Last week she comes over and says, Hey, guess what, Dad? And I thought, oh no, she was so excited. Come on, man, just talk normally, Chris laughed. Oh, I keep forgetting. You're not used to this, Sweet William said with a grin. She's having a baby. So? Chris asked directly. What are you going to do about it? Look at you and Alicia. You both have so many kids and want even more, Sweet William said, watching as Christopher Michael ran out of the house. Hey, Mr. William, Chris and I are talking, Chris said to the boy. Nah, he's just fine, Sweet William smiled at the boy. So? Chris repeated. What's your plan? Well, I asked her to marry me, Sweet William announced joyfully. I came to ask you to be my best man. Why not? You were mine, Chris said, giving his friend a hug. Wow, you're getting married, Mr. Sweet, Christopher Michael exclaimed. Yeah, what do you think? Sweet William asked the boy. That's awesome, Christopher Michael shouted. Can I come to your wedding? Of course, my man, Sweet William replied. I wouldn't dream of getting married without you there. Can I bring my friend too? Christopher Michael asked, smiling while receiving a big hug from Sweet William. A friend? Sweet William laughed. Aren't you a bit young for that? He has a special friend, Chris smiled. Yeah, I do too, Sweet William said, hugging Christopher Michael again. Yeah, bring your friend along. Are you sure you won't join us? Alicia asked. I'd love to, but I have to go. She's cooking something nice for us, Sweet William said, standing up with a grin. Take care, Chris said warmly, and the two men hugged. Pam Broussard was surprised when Trish brought her fiancé into the kitchen. She knew he was black. Trish had mentioned that before. She also knew he was tall since Trish had to look up to see him. But she wasn't expecting someone so enormous. He had to bend a bit to fit through the door. Oh my goodness, she gasped as Trish smiled brightly, holding on to the man. And this is my best friend, Pam. Trish was excited. Pam Broussard. Paul walked into the kitchen with Barbara and Polly followed behind them. Hey, could you give me a hand? Paul asked Sweet William. Think you can handle this little one? Him? Sweet William smiled. I'm not so sure, he looks a little fierce. Mama, mama, Barbara began to chant. Be careful, Polly warned Sweet William playfully. I know karate. You do not, Paul laughed, and Pam came back to reality, taking Barbara from Paul's hands. So, are you the one Trish talks about all the time? Paul asked, warmly shaking the man's hand. Yeah, I guess so. It depends on what she says, Sweet William shrugged. I do too, Polly said. Watch this. Oh, you mean how you are almost as good-looking as me, almost? Paul smiled. Hi-ya, Polly shouted, and playfully struck his father's leg. Ow, boy! Paul laughed and picked up his son, hanging him upside down by his legs. Hey, Polly shouted. Almost? Sweet William chuckled. See? Pam playfully hit Paul with her spatula. That's why Trish wants to leave. You always act like this. Oh no, she didn't tell you? Sweet William laughed. She isn't moving out. I'm moving in. I'm going to have to raise all those ceiling fans, Paul said, glancing at Sweet William's head. Put him down, Paul, Pam instructed. You heard her. She said drop you, Paul teased Polly. I did not, Pam replied. No, Polly yelled as Paul dipped him suddenly. Put him down, Pam repeated. Oh, that's different, Paul said, setting the boy down. It's always like this around here, Trish told Sweet William. I see that, he replied. Want a drink before dinner? Paul asked, reaching for some bottles. Where's Candy? Pam asked. No thanks, Sweet William replied, noticing Trish's subtle shake of her head. Getting ready to wake her up, Paul said. Come on, let's go to the living room and let Pam cook that mystery meat, Trish suggested. You know how she is. We never know what we're eating. Darn it, Trish, Pam yelled. If you keep this up, it will be mystery meat on your plate, understand? She turned to Paul and shook her head. Here, babe, take Barbara. I need to finish dinner before it burns, Pam said, giving her daughter a big kiss. By the way, I saw April today, Alicia said. Oh, yeah? Chris asked, feeling a bit tense. Yeah, you're paying for Jamie to go to St. Richard's, Alicia informed him. Wow, I'm such a generous guy, huh? Chris replied, relaxing. And you're sending April $200 a month for expenses, Alicia continued. Man, I really am nice, huh? Chris said. Alicia, that girl is yours, you know it, she said. I know, he agreed. Jamie Christine Hollister, Alicia stated. Gee, I wonder where the Christine comes from. I wouldn't know, Chris replied. Oh, come on, Chris. Christine and Chris, get it? Alicia said, smiling. Nope, I didn't go to college like you all did, Chris said, giving his wife a playful squeeze. Stop it, you're way smarter than any of us, Alicia said with a giggle. Do you think $200 a month is enough? Chris asked. I'll ask her when I see her next time, Alicia promised, reaching under the blanket playfully. She teased him a bit before asking, Do you think you could... Do you mean that? He replied with a teasing tone. That's Mrs. Dumas, April told Jamie as she buttoned up the child's uniform shirt. You listen to everything she says, okay? If she tells you to stand on your head, you say, yes, ma'am, and do it, understand? Yes, ma'am, Jamie replied eagerly. Here, this is your lunch ticket, April said as she placed it in the child's backpack. It goes in your front pocket, next to your Mickey Mouse pencil. And my crayons, Jamie exclaimed with joy. And your crayons, April confirmed, smiling. April hid behind a tree and watched as bus number 142 arrived. Jamie climbed aboard and April wiped away her tears before walking back toward the trailer. This is Mrs. Dumas, Alicia answered the office phone. She's on the bus, April managed to say through her tears. My baby is on her way to school. That's great, Alicia responded, a bit puzzled. This is April, she cried. I just don't know how I'll ever repay you. Hi, April, Alicia said, her understanding growing. You don't need to thank me. Chris and I are happy to help, okay? If she needs anything, let me know, April promised. I told her to be good. If she isn't, please tell me. I'm sure she will be the best little girl in first grade, Alicia reassured April. After they hung up, April sighed as Zach began to cough again. They were both very sick and had shared needles, but Zach seemed resigned to his fate. April, on the other hand, fought to hold on, worried about what would happen to Jamie if she were gone. Zach blamed everyone but himself for his illness. It's my mom's fault, my dad's fault, even that girl Nicole's fault and April's too. No one forced that needle into your arm but you, April reminded him firmly. At least she knew she was the only one to blame for her own struggles. His attention had been so obvious, almost funny, as she walked through the grocery store aisles. She jokingly said, "Unless you can do it as well as my girlfriend," and laughed when Zach confidently replied, "Who do you think taught her?" They returned to the trailer where Zach was staying on the floor of Rudy's apartment. Jimbo and Big Mike were focused on their work, not even glancing up as they cooked their drugs. April checked on little Jamie, who was still asleep, and then pulled Zach into the bedroom. "Get started," April instructed. Zach quickly brought in his guitar and some clothes that night. Initially, April didn't want to help him. She refused to show him how to use the drugs. But Big Mike was eager to have another customer, so he taught Zach how to prepare the drugs and find a suitable spot. To be fair to Big Mike, he had no idea that his girlfriend had a serious illness. He didn't know he was putting his friends at risk. and by the time he found out, it was too late for Jimbo, who had moved on. "Do you have any cigarettes?" Zach asked after he coughed. "This is my last one. You're not getting it," April replied, pulling a cigarette from the pack. "Come on, that's not fair," Zach complained. "This is Chris," he said when Sandra connected the call. "Chris, it's April," she said. "Can I come see you about something?" Christopher Michael made sure to sit next to Sophia at Mr. Sweet and Miss Trish's wedding. His dad looked important in his tuxedo, assisting Mr. Sweet. The little helper for Miss Trish seemed out of place next to everyone else. Paul and Cindy were together, with Paulie on Paul's left, Barbara on his lap, and Candy in Cindy's lap. "I promise to love and cherish you for as long as we both shall live," William said, and Trish smiled as tears streamed down his face. "The ring is a circle. It has no beginning and no end. It's a symbol of their love," the minister said. The celebration was next door in the church hall. "Yeah, JT's my guy!" Christopher Michael cheered when the DJ announced he would play a Justin Timberlake song. He jumped up from the banquet table and rushed over to where Sophia was sitting. "Naol!" she exclaimed in surprise as he tried to pull her onto the dance floor. "Just give it a try," Nicole encouraged her. "Da!" Sophia called out, hoping Fred would help her. "Just try," Fred signed to her. "You try doing what he does." "Come on, you'll really like it," Christopher Michael said with enthusiasm. Sophia was good at copying others, so she mirrored Christopher Michael's movements. She quickly noticed that whenever she felt a vibration, Christopher Michael would step forward with his right foot and turn. The vibrations were constant, and she began to move with them. "That's it, keep going," Christopher Michael cheered. "Woo, look at those kids." Sweet William laughed. He approached the disc jockey and handed him a $20 bill. "Keep that song playing, okay?" he said, pointing to the two kids dancing joyfully. "Are you sure that boy's white?" Fred joked with Chris as they recorded Christopher Michael and Sophia dancing. "He shines in the dark, he's so pale," Chris chuckled. "See?" Nicole signed when Sophia and Christopher Michael finally returned to the table, both a bit out of breath. "Try it out, it's fun, right?" In response, Sophia hugged her sister warmly. Fred joined them, placing the video camera on the table. "Hey there, want to dance?" Fred asked. "Yeah, right," Nicole said with a smile as she got up. "You just want a reason to be close to me." "That's dancing, isn't it?" Fred grinned. "That's the only kind I know," Nicole replied. Alicia leaned against Chris after he secured Cynthia in her car seat. "I really like weddings," she whispered to him. "Uh-huh, it's the champagne you like." He smiled and kissed her softly. "Take me home," she said playfully. "Get the kids to bed, then we can have some fun later." "Jamie?" Chris asked, nodding toward the girl buckled in the back seat. "She's staying over. She's coming to church with us tomorrow," Alicia replied. "Now hurry it up." "What about the baby?" he asked, gently rubbing her belly. "The baby will be okay," she assured him as she opened her car door. Chris glanced at the minivan next to theirs. Paul Robichaud was asleep in the back while Pam and Cindy hurried to get their kids seated. Paul had been drinking since the bar opened until the bartender cut him off. Cindy caught Chris's eye and quickly looked away, embarrassed. Sophia looked out the window of their SUV at Christopher Michael and smiled as he glanced over. She raised her hand with her thumb, forefinger, and pinky out, signaling, "I love you." Her smile grew wider when he returned the gesture and sent her a friendly kiss. "Hey, Dad, hold on to this, okay?" Christopher Michael said, tapping Chris's tuxedo sleeve. "You'll need it when Sophia and I get married." "Hang on," Alicia said with a smile. "How do you know she'll want to marry you?" "What?" Christopher Michael replied, shocked that she would ask that question. "Come on, look at me. I am amazing, just like a bag of M&Ms. "Hey, don't call your mom a mean name," Chris said firmly. "A bag of M&Ms?" Alicia asked. "Isn't it usually a bag of chips?" "Oh, right, they melt in your mouth, not in your hands," Christopher Michael said with a grin. "Christopher Michael, that's gross!" Alicia shouted, trying her best not to giggle. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.